September 9th, 2010, meeting of the Goffstown Planning Board. It is now 7 p.m. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. Brian.
I'm Brian Rose. I'm the town planner.
Steve Dutton, alternate member of the board.
Philip Devanza.
Gail Bruck, recording secretary.
Alan Yaton, Chair.
Barbara Griffin, planning board member.
Collis Adams. Tim Redmond, Vice Chair.
Carl Foley, alternate.
Welcome. In terms of business agenda, I would like to just bring up one item before we get into minutes for a second. I had an opportunity to meet with the chair and the vice chair of the ZBA, and there was a certain expression they'd like to have 10 minutes of our time some evening to talk about their concerns with some potential aspects of our zoning ordinance with some recommendations and some ideas. And I thought it might be a practical way for us to combine our efforts in terms of what we're talking about for any modifications, revisions, or proposals we want to make to the zoning ordinance for the coming year. And I wanted to get a consensus for the board that we would allow them to have 15 minutes at the start of our next meeting for that purpose. Any board members have a comment?
It's a good idea.
Should we consider that almost like our first workshop on the zoning, and if we have any suggestions, bring them in ourselves, or just hear from the ZBA at that point?
I think it can be a general discussion for a little bit, yes.
Okay.
So could you send out the invitation to the members of the ZBA if they'd like to come?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and also we were looking at that agenda and it's quite short. So if we do want to have more significant discussion, I think that would be a good time to start.
Then why don't you just allocate some time on our agenda schedule for that event, whatever you think it's required, whether it's 15 minutes, 10 minutes, or half an hour, and we'll allot that time for that purpose on our second meeting in September. I would take the minutes from August 12th, 2010. There's some action needed. Does anybody have a motion, corrections, or additions, or deletions to the minutes as recorded? Seeing none, is there a motion on the floor for the minutes of?
Motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion made by Barbara, seconded by Phil to approve the minutes of August 12th, 2010 as written. Any comments? Move the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstaining, I
Steve
wasn't present.
abstains.
No, I wasn't
Motion
here.
carries. Excuse me?
I wasn't here either.
And Carl was not here. You can still vote on the minutes, though, even though you're not here.
Can we
But
do
you
the
had to be present to
continuance?
vote. Okay.
You have 8 sitting, you have both alternates here, making a total of 8, which would be the voting alternate.
Steve to start. We'll alternate as things go through here this evening. Any comments on the our correspondence and FYIs listed in our agenda from the members of the board? And in your package this evening is a last-minute correspondence from Baldwin and Callan PLLC, which will be part of or attentive to one of our hearings this evening. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to glance through it and see what this is all about, because I have no idea at the moment. Yes, Phil? Does anybody have anything else that we wish to discuss before we move into our agenda for this evening? Then I will take, there's been a request to continue for the Walton Site Plan Map 9 Lot 107 to a date uncertain. We have not had any action or any presentations on this, so technically we have not accepted the application as being complete and ready for hearing. Brian, can you bring us up to speed on what the request is?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The applicant received the comments from staff on the site plan, and they had some concerns that, in talking to the owners, that it was going to be a larger undertaking than what the owners had anticipated. They came to the town asking whether or not they could split the project and do the residential portion without having to do the site plan, which we told them yes, that's a possibility to do. However, they also are still required to get Shoreland Protection Act permits, and so that would require review by the DES, and they at this time are wanting to sort of lay it on the table, and the concern that I had with that is, well, it's not an accepted plan yet. We haven't done any public hearings yet. We technically don't have even an accepted application, and they were requesting waiver of most of the development regulations. That was a concern of mine, and that was the reason for a lot of the comments that were in the report. My suggestion is that, and I did one little slide on this, that we would not accept the application as a complete application due to the amount of waivers requested, and allow them to resubmit without penalty of fees for renoticing fees and any additional fees for items that weren't paid for initially, for a period of 1 year, after which all fees would be required again. So if they want to come back to the town when they've got their act a little bit better together, and they feel like, you know, a complete application is what they've got, then, you know, we would consider that application.
Now, have we traditionally waived fees if it's for an extended period of time on date uncertain? I don't think we have.
Occasionally we have. We don't get this kind of a recommendation very often. You've done it.
But, so do we continue it without prejudice? Yes.
I don't have my statutes, which I lost a long time ago, but my concern would be with I can't remember, ask Mr. Callan while he's here, the liberalized vesting provisions, if there's some way that they could consider staying in the pipeline. I think Mr. Rose's proposal is cleaner, because it makes them reapply, and they're going to reapply under the standards in existence at that time. So we'll have gone through presumably town meeting season, zoning changes, and given the status of that application, I think that's appropriate. I don't think there's any reason that application should be vested in any respect. There's only a quarter of an application as it was.
Barbara?
Mr. Rose, one of the things I've been meaning to contact you since Tuesday about, that I never did, was this, because when I looked at it, I will tell you, and this is, you know, a continuing theme from the seat, that this application was not complete. There were too many waivers, there were too many comments, and that, you know, it is my hope that people just get told, no, you're not even close to being ready to the planning board. So I do think, I'm glad that they've decided that coming forward right now isn't the right, and I like this much better than just continuing it as it was, because it was just way too murky with too many conditions and waivers.
Is the submitter of the request, is he an authorized individual in terms of because it's not from the property owner, it's from somebody called Agent Designer.
Yes, he was listed as the agent or the applicant
Okay.
for the project. So.
Good. Members of the board? think we need a motion probably to
Not accept.
not accept the application at this time and waive the fees as you contend for the period of 12 months? Excuse me, go ahead.
Well, I guess I share Barbara's concern, and frankly, I just deny acceptance, let them reapply and ask us at that time.
They can ask us to waive whatever, how much did they pay?
I don't recall.
Here, Barbara.
It was a standard site plan fee. I think you probably have it in your
I
application.
kept looking, I
down.
couldn't find it.
Broke it down
Oh, it's
in
right here.
443.
I guess I'm a little irritated that it took up staff time and our time to look at that. So I'm going to move that we find that the application is not complete and deny acceptance.
A motion on the floor, do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been made by Jim and seconded by Barbara. Any comments on the motion? Phil?
Does that mean that they lose their fee?
They can come and request a waiver when they reapply.
Yes.
I want to see a lot better application come in when they do that.
You can ask for a waiver on the second application.
Which we can address at the time of application. Which if it's in 2 months, I would think people would be very inclined to grant. Which if it's in 14 months, I would think people would be less inclined to grant.
Or can I ask a question of Barbara?
Sure, you certainly.
Was there any indication of how long of a time period that they would be ready?
They were wanting to do at least the residential portion very quickly. However, that doesn't address the site plan at all. So they were questioning whether or not they would be able to feasibly do the site plan, the commercial office part of it at all. And so it may not come back. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I just do have a concern about the loss of the fees. I mean, it's obvious that, Barbara, I understand, but, you know, they're
Isn't
trying...
that good? I don't even have to speak. It's like being with my husband. I just make a face and... I was making a joke.
I'm not responding to that. I'm not going there.
Ladies and gentlemen, be easy on each
I
other,
guess,
please.
I guess I just have a concern that, you know, trying to do the residential portion, that perhaps the plan is a little bit more than they anticipated, and, you know, not everybody can go out and afford to hire engineers and everything to tell them exactly what they need to do it. They, you know, they came in, I think they put their best foot forward, and I would just like to see the consideration of the fees to be waived.
Barbara?
I understand that, but when you have 9 things listed and the only comment is request waiver for all, and it's signed by your agent, you know, not yourself, I mean, this was, I understand that, you know, that is an issue, and I don't have any desire to take $400 from people, but Jim's right, it takes up staff time, it comes here. I think we address it at a future date if they come back. Here it is, 444.
Any further? Yes.
I would
Carl.
agree that the issue of the fee can be taken up as a waiver request at some point in the future. And at that time, we'll consider the timing and all other, you know, circumstances involved with the waiver request. No problem with that.
Any further comment on the motion? I'll move the motion. The voting party is Corey? No, we have everybody here. Carl, excuse me. I wrote that down too, so I wouldn't forget that. I've got to put a name tag on one of these days. Hey, you. We have 6 members and 2 alternates, so it's just the regular members voting at the moment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously in not accepting the application. Moving on to our first regularly scheduled piece of business. It would be under old business, map 5, lot 102 and 103, a public meeting hearing for a proposed amendment will allow the approved Viking Orchard development to be built in phases. 34 lot open space subdivision with one open space lot. Hollisell LLC applicant, Worthley Hill Road, zoned residential 1 and agricultural, and this was continued from August 12th, 2010 meeting, so the meeting is now open. Yes, Steve?
For the record, I'm recused from this matter because of firm involvement.
Mr. Chairman, I have to recuse myself from this item on the agenda as well.
Okay. Then, Carl, you are the voting alternate in this matter.
With your permission, may I
You-
remain
You
disopposed?
both can remain seated, please.
I'm just going to voice that I think when people recuse, they need to remove themselves from the table, because it creates the impression from anybody from the public or looking that they're a participant. And there have been times in the past where I think I've even looked to you for an answer to a question when you've been recused. So I'm just going to state that.
I agree with Barbara.
Okay,
Thanks.
gentlemen, we'll welcome you back in a few moments.
Just stick around, yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
just so you know, I wasn't losing, it's 676:12, Roman numeral 6 was the section I was searching for in the last discussion, so it does exist. You may look, it's the vesting of applications.
okay.
To complete that incompleted thought that I thrown out there.
I'll have to read that.
You'll have to read it, I'm sure eagerly you will tonight.
Which one was it, Jim?
76:12, Roman numeral 6, I think.
I'll highlight it for a quiz next meeting. Is there somebody representing the applicant wishing to speak in reference to this?
Yes, the attorney's here.
Please come up and join us.
Did you have something you wanted to?
If you'd like me to start, I can.
Sure, I thought that was the protocol.
That sort of is. Mr.
Ryan.
Chair, this request came to you several months ago, and we're finally now getting to it. It was continued at the last meeting, and since then, the staff has had some discussion with the applicant and made some clarifications and changes to their previous request. You have a letter in your correspondence packet, and that details out what the request is. Basically, the biggest change was that they removed letter D from the list, which addressed vesting on the project. That they had been requesting that the vesting would be complete after phase 1, and that was, I think, a concern to the board at the last meeting, and so that was what had generated significant discussion. And in talking with the applicant afterwards, they had decided that that was okay with them to just remove that and go with the standard time frame as was already listed on their plans from a long time ago. So that was the biggest change, and then the other changes were that they just went through and clarified what portions would be in what phase a little bit better for you. So I'll actually just read what it says in their letter. It says phase 1 shall include lots 103, and I did include a map here for your visual enjoyment. Phase 1 shall include lots 103 through 103-5 inclusive. The proposed upgrades to the water booster station to be owned by the Goffstown Village Water Precinct. The installation of drainage, municipal water and sewer, and individual services. The reconstruction of Worthley Hill Road from Tyler Drive to Merrill Road, and the southerly detention pond along Worthley Hill Road. Phase 2 shall include lots 103-6 through 103-20 inclusive. The reconstruction of Worthley Hill Road from Merrill Road to Red Tail Drive, where it becomes a Class 6 road. utility installations, the construction of Kestrel Drive, and the remaining detention ponds and access roads. And Phase 3 shall include lots 103-21 through 103-33 inclusive, utility installations, and the construction of Red Tail Drive. So, and as you can see on your exhibit, the roadway would be constructed all the way up to connect to this is the first connecting street, Tyler Drive, I believe is the name. Yeah, Tyler Drive. And that is,
Merrill.
I'm sorry, that's Merrill. Yeah, Tyler's over here. Merrill is here. And so it would be constructed all the way up toward past that intersection, giving access to these residents as well as, you know, an improved roadway for access off of Merrill there. Then the next phase would finish out the construction of the roadway as well as doing all these lots and the retention. And then the third phase would do this last cul-de-sac with the lots and whatever retention was left in there. I'm sorry, the detention is going to be done in phase 2, but this little, if you can call it a detention pond. Okay, that's just slopes there, so there's no detention there. So that was the extent of the request. So the recommendation from staff is to approve the addition of phasing notes A, B, and C as detailed in the report. And I'll turn it back to the chair.
Would you like to address the board?
I can briefly summarize. My name is Attorney Panciaco. I'm here on behalf of Holosal, the applicant. Last time we were before the board in August, we had 3 requests. One was a 90-day extension. Second one was to request that the Glenview Homeowners Association be released from its obligations associated with the water booster station, assuming that the Goffstown Water Precinct assumes ownership and control of that equipment. And the third was to request the phasing of the project. Also included, as Brian mentioned, was a request that the completion of phase 1, which was slightly different under the prior note, constitute active and substantial completion, which has since been removed. At that time, the board granted the first 2 requests and continued the third request to this hearing due to the late hour. At that meeting, certain board members did express some concerns about the phasing, and the concerns were raised in relation to a project that I knew nothing about but now know a little more about, and I'm sure I'll learn more about it, called Samos Park. And I guess Samos Park was reconfigured into Mountain Laurel Estates a few years after it was approved. I have the plan here for anybody that cares to take a look. And I also have a reduced copy of the plan that's up there, which I'm not sure the board will need now that we have the overhead. But if anybody wants it, I have it here. The Mountain Laurel Estates, formerly Samos Park, had common leach fields. It had a community water system. It had private roads when it was originally approved in the late 80s to the early 90s. And I don't know in particular what went wrong with that, but there was proposed with the approval of 46 lots a phasing schedule, if you will, whereby a certain number of permits would be issued with each phase. Called into question at a later date before it was reconfigured into the current plan, and I guess there was a re-subdivision of the remaining lots. There was a question raised about the permits that would be issued within each phase and whether that was growth control. Now, whether that caused any kind of a problem, I don't know. But in the context of this application, I believe that what came up last time we met, was concerns about an association, ownership of common land, what would happen if some lots were sold and other lots were not, and in other words, what problems could go wrong with the phasing. The phasing is simply meant to break it up into smaller bites, if you will, and allow for lower performance security amounts to be used, which are more likely gotten in today's economic climate. There are no common leach fields or community wells associated with this project or private roads for which fees are charged in this project. Well, this project was reconfigured with public roads when it was reapproved in '96. But nonetheless, there's no assessments or common improvements that would be shared by a fewer number of homeowners if the project were not completed, because this project before you has public sewer, public water, and public roads. So it's, for whatever it's worth, that's the insight that I can bring to the table as to that concern in relation to what happened with Samos Park. And if there's other things that went wrong that I don't know about, perhaps you can share them with me. Other than that, we are requesting that the board allow us to phase it for the reason previously stated, allow it to be built in smaller bites and built out more slowly over a very difficult time, and not put anybody at risk by trying to do too much in too short of an amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the board, do we have any questions? Yes, Jim?
When we approved this initially with the conditions, what did we establish as the measure of active and substantial development?
I don't know any project that you establish that at the time of approval.
Well, we do. We say it's going to constitute, so they get,
Well,
you define it under your vesting, and we always have that as a condition of what it's going to be. And since that was raised as an issue, taken off, if we've already given that away by defining it in the approval as commencement of construction, for example, we need to go back and visit that to see if it's done on a per phase basis now, but still applies to the whole project. I don't see I'd like to see the wording in our initial approval.
the only wording I remember seeing everything are all the conditions, and there were no vesting.
Well, we define it. Active and substantial development will consist of X. Say what it is.
It is defined on the actual plan. I can run upstairs and grab it if the board wishes.
I believe it's defined in the regulations.
No, yeah,
too.
well, in our regs or in our approval, we can define it in our approval. I just want to see what we did. Because you've assigned, the applicant has agreed that, as I understand, that will be done on a phase-by-phase basis, but we've already granted for the entire project. We need to go back and amend that.
I believe, and this is by memory, that it included all of the utilities had to be installed. And I know that all the utilities are technically installed by the phase 2 per that note, or?
Phase 2, because that's when the road and
Yep.
everything is done.
Let me just finish that thought. In
Jeff,
asking that question, I really don't care what the answer is. I just want to make sure we've dealt with the issue.
Actually, they do have some utility installations for the phase 3 portion of it inside the roadway of phase 3.
I believe there's a note on the plan, Brian, that I can see right here. Note 16, active and substantial development or building under RSA 674-39-1, relative to the 4-year exemption to regulation changes and substantial completion of the improvements as shown on the subdivision plan or site plan under RSA 674-39-2, relative to final vesting to be completion of all required utility extensions in and all improvements to Bradley Hill Road. That's
That's
on
phase-
that.
So I would assume that's phase 2 under this, because the utility you're talking about in phase 3, I'm assuming associated with the construction of the actual road and houses.
Yes, so I would say you're probably right.
Hold on to that
It's hard
for
to
a
read,
Yeah.
it's very small.
Can I keep this?
Yes.
The phasing is clearly outlined in A, B, and C. What's not there is the time element. What is your proposed time element to complete all 3 phases?
You're asking me?
Well,
I wasn't sure you
Addressing
didn't
the
look
chair.
at me.
Address the chair, but
We,
Please.
we hope to start with phase 1, and given the current state of affairs in the real estate market, I can't make a promise as to how long it will take to sell phase 1. And I am inclined to think that my client isn't going to be looking to build phase 2 until phase 1 is sold. But that's speculation also. I would be disingenuous to make any representation, in fact, as to the timing.
Okay, Barbara, yes.
And this is probably to Brian and the applicant, if I look at the phase 1 5 lots that are being developed, and I look at the open space behind it, because that was part of the open space that was considered in the calculation for the development, how much area am I talking about?
I don't know.
Is it fair to say it's less than 10 acres? Or do you have any
Probably-
idea?
Probably in that range, about 10 acres.
Because the full lot is 75 acres, I believe, or somewheres in that vicinity.
Yes.
So just think of it as a proportion of what you see.
Right.
Probably represents about maybe 10%, so it's
Probably less.
Probably
That's why-
less.
It's probably less, because that is a pie-shaped piece of property. That's why I'm curious as to how much area we're talking
But
about.
once they start, all the open space is dedicated to that particular
Well,
point of
that
time.
That's
brings us
correct.
to the issue of who is holding and managing this property, because
0.7.
right now, it's obviously held by Hollisell, which is gonna be a different developer, which is gonna be a different, so, I think that was one of the concerns that was raised in conjunction with the last meeting, was to what's happening to title and management of the balance of the property while anything is done.
Each lot, when purchased, comes with an undivided 1/34 interest in the open space. And that's how it's also assessed. So you get a tax bill that has the lot plus the 1/34 in the open space. It's undivided and cannot be subdivided. So, for instance, if the first 6 lots were to sell, you'd have 6 homeowners, each with a 1/34, and Hollisell would own the remaining lots in the remainder undivided interest in the open space. I'm not sure that answers your question.
Well, it sort of goes, and I'm not phrasing this very well, to my concern with the phasing. It's, you've created a few lots with a percentage interest in a larger entity that's not created. And to the extent that you phase it, and I know legally what you're saying is there is a creation of something holding the rest of it, but you have a 1/34 interest of open space that, in the Samos Park example, had an interest in an organization that ceased to exist. And so by phasing this, and I'm not sure as a practical reality you end up with any different outcome, the concern is 5 houses get developed, you have 5 homeowners. Who's managing the rest of that property?
Well, and I guess my question is, too, on the management. Really, the only common improvement out there is the walking trails. There's not a whole lot to manage as far as the open space.
But I guess my point is that one of the reasons projects are not phased, for example, is because there's surety put up for the cost of the entire project. So should the town end up with residents owning 5 lots or 10 lots, and the rest of the development is not developed, it gives the town some options in connection with the completion of the development or security for the ownership rights. And we're not out to protect private property, and I understand that. People buy things and it's subject to whatever the conditions are. But, and I understand it's a risk in all projects. I mean, essentially, you're talking about completion. A project starting and a project completing. And the question is, I mean, I understand the bonding issue, but I guess I don't see any other reason for phasing this. And I see a lot of potential issues by not having security for the entire project. Because it's not individual lots. You've created open space, you've created a association, there are documents we have, and in phase 1, you haven't even gotten close to that point where the developer gets to say, enough lots have been sold, I'm no longer in it, and you've transferred management. I mean, and I have some issues as to how much area phase 1 actually encompasses, because I think you've got some houses on very small lots in ag zoning. And I don't think there's 10 acres there, but, I mean, I know you're gonna need a utility to get the frontage to match the water and sewer, so. But that's my concern with the phasing is. And there were a lot of issues with Samos Park. It did ultimately get resolved, but only after there were at least 2 other proposals for a water system to go in there. And I understand you don't have that common utility issue, but it was still an issue of owners being left with an uncompleted development and there being no surety or funds available to complete it.
I guess in thinking about that, the purpose of the surety here would be to build road frontage for the remaining lots and provide utilities for phase 2 and phase 3. So in other words, phase 1 were to be built and be the only section that was built. I'm not sure I see any harm there, simply if phase 2 and phase 3 were not built. Simply because, well, first of all, most towns aren't excited about adding new lots. And one of the benefits of phasing is to allow a slower absorption. And towns are usually very concerned about a huge influx of new residents. So that's another piece of that, not necessarily something that's important to us. But in all honesty, if the performance bond isn't in place to bring up the water and sewer and build a new road, a new cul-de-sac with more lots, I'm not sure what disadvantage the owners in phase 1 are at, because they have their undivided interest in the common land, they have their water and sewer, they have their individual lot, and perhaps there may be a point in time where we would say phase 2 and phase 3 no longer exist, and maybe the undivided interest held by each phase 1 lot owner becomes larger if the parcel's not developed. I'm not sure there would be any risk or downside there for the town. And that's what the performance bond is intended to protect, is the town.
No, I understand.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Jim?
Looking at it more from the, I guess, from Public Works view, the phase 2 will be where the Hill Road reconstruction from Merrill Road to Red Tail Drive. I assume is the last of the roads. I can't remember that run through. But when we approved this, was there some representation made on which we relied for approval of any part of the project for the reconstruction of the upper portion of Worthley Hill Road? In particular, we've encountered in the prior unfortunate episode of logging the drainage issues up on the upper Worthley Hill Road, if I recall, by allowing that to be in phase two, we face the possibility that will never be done, for the reasons you just said. How much would that influence our concerns about what would be our concern if that happened, where only phase one is essentially bonded and we're only assured of the construction of phase one? How's that for a backwards, intricate
I was
question?
with you for a little while, but I think.
I'll then turn it over to Megan to make sense of it.
Yeah.
I'll try and answer your question, Jim. So the bond, if you have a bond on phase one, we'll get the reconstruction up to Mineral Road, and the town, if you remember, there were some detention ponds related to the development, and then there were some other detention ponds related to improving the existing drainage system.
Right.
Because we have severe water problems and we have no storage, not enough storage capacity. So there's 2 ponds related to the town's drainage and 1 pond related to the development. In phase one, the large pond that will be built is more for the town's purposes. In phase two, there's a large pond out toward the back near the cul-de-sac end. That's for the development purpose, and a smaller one up front. That was just another one to help for the town's drainage system. So if the reason we got into the issue of reconstructing the road was, one, you need to bring up water and sewer, so you've got a trench patch for water, trench patch for sewer, trench patches for services. The road is totally junk. It's a failed road. So to patch it back together, would be very difficult. Plus, you've got all the construction traffic going up there to build the site. So we just felt as though there's no way you can just repair that. You really got to just grind it up and rebuild it. So I think with phase one, there'll be an improvement to the town road, new drainage in that section, so I think the town will benefit from that. Obviously, it'd be great to have it all, but I do understand the trying to bond it in smaller pieces. When I did the bond calculation, you're looking at just rough numbers, like a $3 million bond for the whole thing. Where if you break it up, it's more like $1 million chunks or smaller. So it makes it more reasonable for that. I guess the only thing I can think, just trying to play devil's advocate, the only risk I could think that we would have, but if phase 2 and 3 never got built, this wouldn't happen. But say phase 1 got built, you upgrade the road, you binder it. One question I would have is how quickly is phase 2 coming? Because usually you want to top it right after, like the next year. So that would be one question. Do we top it the year later, or if we think this next phase 2 is going to happen soon, we might wait 1 more year. I would never really want to extend that more than 2 years before top coating. It's just not a good idea. It's not an awful thing to base it and top it. Then have construction traffic on it. I mean, it'll be a good new road. It'll be able to handle it. But I guess, you could look at that. You build phase 1, you got a new road, now you've got construction traffic on that new piece of road. But if it wasn't a new piece of road, say it was just an existing road that was in decent shape, you're still going to have the traffic over it. So I don't think that's a reason not to phase it. I don't know. Is that getting anywhere, answering your question, or am I making it backwards and confusing also?
It's
Contagious.
There's an observation of, we have a bond for phase 1, and they have to come back to the board for release of the bond, correct?
Yes.
So at that time, we have some assurance. At that time, they better have a better feel for what's going on in phase 2, and we can take and move that bond over to phase 2 without relinquishing the bond, I believe. Yes.
Well, if they let me try to simplify my question. If they walk away on a project after phase 1, are we in a better or worse position? Are we missing some integral improvement that was fundamental to our approval even of phase 1? Because it wouldn't be bonded.
I don't know. Megan?
I say we're in a better position because we gained 1 large detention pond to help us. One of the drainage concerns way up at the top of the road has already been addressed, actually. So I know that was a concern earlier, but that's been addressed, and it is functioning well now. It's not causing us any new problems. I mean, we all know that road's in bad shape, and our existing drainage system isn't great up there. But I can only think we're in a better position because we'll have at least 1 new section of road, new drainage, a new detention pond. I don't see how that's any worse for the town in any way.
But I do think that when they come back for release of their bond, we have an opportunity to review the project's timing and possibly how soon they might be moving it forward. And as far as I'm concerned, we're still holding the bond, and we could take and posture a little bit. I don't know. Tim?
If we were to approve the phasing, what happens to the process for requesting extensions? Does this project then, is it void of a extension request for the future?
No. They have a, I'll let you speak, go ahead.
No, you're doing fine.
No, I'm not doing fine. I got
Well,
both feet in the mud over here, so.
Well, I think that goes to the four-year exemption issue, which I was addressing, because these continuances that we've been granting are to meet the conditions precedent before the approval becomes final. Once it becomes final, it's final. It's just subject to zoning or regulation changes unless it becomes in this kind of protected vesting status, which is my concern and the applicant's concern about what active and substantial development has to be done or substantial completion has to be reached to create that vesting. But in terms of our taking any further action, I don't think there is anything that has to come before us. We don't typically set a time on when an application project has to be built out.
So theoretically, it could be out there for the next 25 years
So we change our
and
zoning.
not get built.
No.
I
Not
personally don't think so, but
Well, I'm talking
No.
about the legal side of it.
No, not in it,
Our
not in,
approvals have our,
not in its present form. Certainly not.
No, but I think Tim's point is, could phase one be built and phase two and
I said
three
if
be
we
out there
if
for
we
25 years?
accepted the phasing, I said, was the first statement I made.
Because arguably, if you've started ground on phase one, you've met all the conditions precedent, you've begun your construction, and I think Tim's question is, does phase two and phase three then essentially permanently vest?
That's
Right.
exactly what I was
but
asking.
if we defined active and substantial
Yeah.
development, which is the four-year vesting, and then substantial completion as completing, somebody with young eyes has to read this, improvements as shown on the subdivision site plan relating to final vesting, this is worded, to the completion of required utility extensions and all improvements to Worthley Hill Road. We've gotten all the improvements out of it that we're gonna want, and then we don't care.
Right.
So what I'm getting to is if phase one was to be built, I would like to see the extension to the top of the hill be done and all the public improvements completed as part of phase one, so that if phase two and phase three go away someday and never come back, the promise that this project was approved upon was that they were gonna rebuild Worthley Hill Road gets done before it ever goes away.
But would that constitute active and substantial completion at that point?
No, the question is, are you better off actually, are all parties better off with phase one being completely independent, and then when phase two goes forward, then you've got your substantial completion?
I think we are. I think we're better the way it's worded now, because if they don't complete all that, as Tim suggested, we could change our zoning, and they're at risk on phases 2 and 3. Because we've defined it to be all the improvements to Worthley Hill Road. So they complete phase 1, they doodle around for the next 10 years. We do our zoning, they haven't completed Worthley Hill Road, they haven't met the statutory standards, and they're subject to the zoning change, and I think they understand that risk, but that's the lever we have. And that's how we treat all developments. They're at risk if they hang out there. Now, if there's some special consideration for erosion control or something, we put time limits, but typically we don't. I'm not sure there's any reason here. Unless, as you say, there was a quid pro quo.
I think I'd like to hear from the general public to explain influence. Yes, you may.
I have a question for Megan, and this has to do with sort of vesting. I mean, this project was approved with conditions 2 years ago. So the detention ponds that were designed and approved are now 2 years old, over 2 years. Are you aware of any changes in state regulations that would affect our approval of these ponds, of these detention ponds?
There are new AOT rules now.
And they would
This is starting from, like, those are pretty brand new. So, those AOT rules. So if this started from scratch, yes, there are new rules that require infiltration, and I'm sure I'm not summarizing it very well at all, but the biggest change to me that I'm aware of is that you have to require infiltration now, and that there's like a calculation, to figure that out. Like these are just your basic detention ponds. They're not like the infiltrating kind, the newer methods. So that change, if this was coming now, here on in,
This would be, that would be different, okay. All right, that's it for now.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have one question. I want to make sure I understand what Member Raymond was suggesting, and if I'm incorrect, please tell me. That note, from what I'm reading tonight, is that provided we complete all the improvements promised for Worthley Hill Road, we will then have met the standard for active and substantial?
That's what it says now.
Yes, it does, but I just want to make sure that this is what we've been talking about, just to be clear.
I haven't suggested
So,
that.
okay, so if we were to complete phase one, as it's shown there, and then just complete what is proposed for Worthley Hill Road, for whatever reason there may be at that time, and not necessarily complete the new road in phase two right away, and we pave within 2 years, as Megan suggests, we will have still met the standard.
That's whatever the current standard is.
Okay,
The
I just
utilities-
wanted to make sure I
required
had that clear.
utility extent, yeah. And all improvements.
Well, I mean,
That's
you
the
know, I
utility
was,
extension in Worthley Hill Road and improvements. That's what we approved before. And I wouldn't soften that.
Okay.
Are there any members of the public wishing to speak in reference to the phasing of this project? Only the phasing. Len, please introduce yourself.
If I may, if I could address before, I have a few
And-
points,
and-
but one
And
question.
you are?
Leonard Stewart,
Okay.
Worthley Hill Road,
Thank you,
direct
Len.
abutter to the project. Somewhat like Groundhog Day, because I keep coming back here on this same thing. I have one question which I've been unable to get from the discussion as to whether the phase one of the project, the improvements in Worthley Hill Road, and I believe part of this project was extension of water and sewer all the way to the end of the pavement there. It would only be extended in phase one to the corner of Worthley and Merrill, and then utilities would be run for the other two roads as part of phases 2 and phases 3. I just haven't been able to gather that clearly from the discussion here tonight.
I would assume that the utilities are extended to Merrill Road under phase one.
So that then as phases 2 and 3 are built out, there will be additional construction traffic, and road work for those two phases.
Yes.
Okay, I think I have the answer. I just find the discussion of phasing here, I believe it's premature. I believe the issue that was raised by Mr. Raymond about conditions precedent, one of the things that was talked about was providing public water to this site. A year ago, I believe it was the October meeting, 11 and a half months ago, I was here talking about this same issue of completion of the water agreement. As of today, I spoke with the Goffstown Village Water Precinct. I spoke with the past president of the Glenview Homeowners Association and the current president of the group. And despite the applicant's representations to the contrary about dotting I's and crossing T's, there is no agreement. It's essentially a deadlocked situation where they need a unanimous sign-off, and they have a homeowner who will not sign off on the project. I think to discuss all of this with an extension running until November 12th is very premature, because that's a primary condition of the subdivision approval. I believe, and someone can correct me on the technicalities, that both the density and the yield plan were based on the presumption this would be in an area served by water and sewer, and they have yet to come up with, and I mean, we're talking about water back in 2008. We've been talking about a water agreement for a year. There is still none. They keep coming back. 60 days more, 90 days more. At what point is this board going to draw the line and say, come up with a plan that works? Because, either they've got to do something with Glenview, or do they build another pumping station on their own property on the other side of the road. I think it's premature. I think the phasing, they get the benefits of an open space plan, but you're basically creating 6 non-conforming lots in an R1 zone with nothing other than a premise, maybe we'll build the rest of it someday. I don't see that's to the advantage of the town.
We're talking about phasing tonight.
Well, I thought that's what I was talking about, phasing. You're talking phase 1, you're talking 6 non-conforming lots in an R1 zone. I would be a bit worried. I think that the point was hit on here as far as the phasing, the bonding in phases, that if you don't have any bond that would assure the completion of the utility lines to the top of the road. Again, I believe that was one of the original conditions of approval, was extension of public water or to the end of the pavement where the Class 6 road starts there. I think for all of these reasons, I think you're changing the rules in midstream. I don't think it's a good idea. I think that the board should wait until the current extension runs out and discuss phasing after it's been proved that the applicant can indeed provide the utilities as promised to the subdivision. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak reference the application for a phasing of the Whitley Hall Road project? Seeing none, members of the board, any other further questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Is there still no 3-party agreement? I'm just,
There is a 3-party agreement. It's form over substance at this point. We're talking about two-party agreements versus 1 3-party agreement. And in addition to that, the applicant also has Plan B out there as an option to pursue in the event there was no agreement. But we have word tonight from both counsel for Glenview as well as one of the officers of the association that it's just a matter of form over substance. We have an agreement.
well, that's, in all fairness, that is what you said the last time with an email from Attorney Cronin.
I
So,
have-
I mean,
I
I
have
know,
no
like you
control
have
over
no
this.
control. So, but in any case, the tri-party agreement needs to be done before this starts.
Yes.
Okay.
We understand that, and we'll submit a signed copy of 1 agreement or 2 agreements to Brian, whatever it may be. It'll be between the precinct and the developer and Glenview and the precinct, or 1 agreement signed by all 3 parties. I'm not sure why, but it'll all be there.
Phil,
After Barbara's questions are all answered.
do you have an additional question, Barbara?
You mentioned Plan B. I just have a question, because if there's no tri-party or agreement with Glenview and that pumping station, to upgrade that pumping station to provide the water, then I assume the Plan B that you mentioned is another plan to bring the water up here?
We have an option to put an independent pump station in another location on the property.
Which property?
I believe it's right on the end of this property on one of the lots.
Phase 1?
Yes. And it will be constructed as part of the Phase 1 improvements. But that's a very remote possibility. It's something we've always kept out there as an option in the event that we were not able to reach agreement with Glenview, which we've been told we had.
Just to follow up on that, I guess I don't recall, because this project has been in front of the board for a while. I've been
Yes.
on and off as a selectman's rep.
Mm-hmm.
And the properties and the lots that are approved in Phase 1, am I hearing that Plan B's pumping station has no effect on those existing lots?
I'm not sure of the exact location, and the pumping station is so very small. I suspect it'll be small, if any. But we haven't gone into the engineering detail because it's always been 99% probable that we would have the tri-party because the precinct would prefer only one pumping station.
I understand that, but I guess what I'm hearing, okay, or I'm only hearing a part of, that there's a possibility that if the tri-party agreement does not go through and Plan B has to be implemented, then there could be engineering that comes in front of this board because now we have to make modifications to the approval of the lots in Phase 1 because there could be engineering for that pumping station that's going to affect those lots.
I don't know that that's the case.
But it's possible.
Yes, I suppose it is
Possibility
possible.
that this,
Yeah.
if this gets approved in phases, and we have to go to Plan B, that this board may wind up with a completely different engineering plan for the Phase 1.
No, that's not the case. It would be a matter of the pump station not being in the Tyler Drive subdivision. It would just be placed right there in the beginning of Phase 1, is my understanding.
Bill, do you understand the first lot on Worthley Hill on the left-hand side is about 85 feet up from the start of their property? And that's probably generally the location of where that pump station would be at the base of the project.
Right.
It
Why
won't
are
be on
people-
somebody's
It's not
property.
even discussed.
And I
Right.
don't
It's
think
very remote.
remote, very remote. Barbara?
Everybody's sort of discussing this like they've heard about it. I'm sort of looking at the motion, wondering why we made a motion sort of going from a tri-party to a two-party, or, I mean,
It's not part
if
of-
we have to, if there's a Plan B, you have to come back.
Oh, we know that.
Yeah, I don't know why
All
we're
right,
going
okay,
that direction.
I mean,
It's
It's
pointless.
very minor.
all right,
Yes,
They understand they'd have to come back.
yes.
well, I mean,
It's not before us, they're active.
okay,
All right.
I mean, pumping stations and noise generated a lot of activity on this application. It wasn't just a little minor engineering
And
thing.
I think they're a risk if they come back, we don't want
Right.
it.
Okay,
I
all right.
understand that.
Any other members of the board wish to make a comment, ask a question? Tim?
So, Attorney Pansiacchio, are you considering amending your phasing request to include the length of Worthley Hill, as you were just asking Attorney Raymond about?
I asked a question to make sure I understood. I'm not changing anything,
Okay,
no.
I just wanted to make sure.
This was agreed to before tonight.
Now, hearing no further comments, we'll close the public hearing.
Thank you.
Members of the board, excuse me?
We can deliberate later.
You think this is a long deliberation, or is this a short?
Or are other people waiting?
It's fine, we understand. Members of the board, do we want to deliberate now, or do we wish to postpone until the end of the meeting? Things are fresh in our mind right now.
I'm happy to make a motion
Thank you.
to approve the phasing request, but with the condition, there's been no request to change the vesting provision on what could be note 16, if I could read it clearly. I give it to my assistant to confirm.
That's correct.
And understanding that the conditions precedent still have to be met, subject to the previous and 90-day extension.
Correct.
So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's not like everything's been done to start. There's still a couple of conditions that need to be done.
Do I hear a second to Jim's motion? Motion on the floor. Carl, you are.
That wording will be within the motion. I'll second.
Seconded by Carl. Any discussion on the motion? 6 voting members.
I mean, I'm going to vote for this only because I understand the concept of phasing, but I don't even think this should be before the board. The continuances should have been denied a few requests ago. But I'm going to vote for it.
Into the discussions, hearing no further comments, move the motion. All those in favor of approving the phasing as presented, say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Chair votes positive, yes. Motion carries. Phil and Tim voted in the nay side.
Have that back. It's my ShopRite assistant.
Moving on to our next item on our agenda. Second item in our old business is map 9, lot 33-7, 46 and 60. Subdivision review hearing for proposed 17-lot open space subdivision, revised from 19 lots. Blackbriar Woods LLC and William and Elizabeth Cordes, owners. Montalona Road and Blackbrook Road zoned agricultural, and continued from July 22nd, 2010. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the Blackbriar Woods, as you stated, project. It's located between Montalona Road and Blackbrook Road, just west of Serenitas Lane, and also Tyrrell Hill. The project is to subdivide approximately 141.55 acres into 17 residential lots and a very large open space lot. The remainder of that, all that open space will remain undeveloped as part of this open space development plan and would not be further subdivided. On July 22nd, the town approved a yield plan for the 17 lots. They dropped it down from 19 lots because of some additional wetlands that had been found on the property. Since then, the applicant has had some discussion regarding the actual subdivision plan, but the discussion was continued due to receiving the plans late before the hearing, and so the applicant's again here tonight to have this additional discussion on the subdivision plan. This is the approximate layout of the plan and open space lots. The two large lots that you see that are left over are open space, and then there's a small one against the river that you can't really see, but that's the third lot. And this is a closer up shot of the subdivided lots where they are planning currently to show all 17 lots. Some key considerations: the property has numerous wetlands on it. That's I think an obvious thing that we've already seen. Planning board has approved the yield plan for 17 lots. The new road to be built is a cul-de-sac. One note to make on that is that it's, I believe, a longer cul-de-sac than what would typically be allowed in the town. Fire department would have to sign off, and we have not yet received a fire department comment or sign off on that, so that's one thing to just consider. Drainage designs are proving to be a challenge, and I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about that from the applicant, so I'm not going to go into too much, but that's due to the numerous wetlands on the property and trying to avoid impacting the wetland buffers. And as Megan actually just stated, there's some new national regulations, and I'm going to allow Mr. Mitchell to address some of the things they've been discussing regarding drainage and the solutions there. The town has not been able to come to I guess, a good solution with the applicant at this time. So what the recommendation really is going to be is to hear what they have to say, and then continue the application for another month and allow for some additional time to address staff's concerns regarding drainage and the new infiltration rules that they're trying to implement on this plan. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair and allow for a presentation from Mr. Mitchell.
Is there an individual representing the applicant to present? Eric?
Yes, my name is Eric Mitchell. I'm here to present this plan on behalf of Blackbriar Woods. The plan that I have up here is a colored up rendering of the layout that we have. It does differ a little bit from what was submitted, and I'd like to give you a brief synopsis. I also have extra copies for you if you'd like to look at those as well. I have some for those who can see, and I have some for the bigger ones for those who maybe can't see the other ones too.
Do I take that personally? You did say you're having trouble reading something, so do you want one of the big ones?
No, I'll try the little.
Okay, good. All right, I will do that. No, I'll just send them right, just like that.
This is for,
Thank you, Eric.
oh, this is for the
Was it one?
It's the whole side of it.
It's a set.
I don't think he knows that. I think he counted to send them down.
What? Oh, excuse me.
No.
I didn't count them.
No, I
I'm
think,
sorry. There are some more over there that need to come around this way, Brian. I shortchanged the folks on this side of the table. Not intentionally.
Okay, so
That's,
that goes to that.
thank you, sir.
And I still have larger ones like this one here if anyone would like to
there you
see
go,
those.
Barbie. You have a real
Yeah,
pretty,
everybody
pretty
can have
drawing.
a second page.
Easy to see.
There you go. Second page.
There's two small plans we set. One is the color up, the other one is a landscaping plan. I'd like to talk to the color up first and give you an update what we've done since the last time we met with the planning board. We have met with the Conservation Commission, I believe, on 2 occasions. The concerns that we are having relative to stormwater management did not affect the town regulations. Those we did meet when we had submitted the plans. But as Brian has indicated, there are new alteration terrain rules at the state. They have been in effect since the beginning of 2009, but a lot of projects have not been ongoing, so it's a site-by-site basis that you have to try to take care of your stormwater, and infiltration is a key to a lot of that part of the change. What we have always had, we've had a infiltration basin near the beginning of the road, about 300, 400 feet in, and the problem that we have been having is taking care of the water that is down towards the end of the cul-de-sac. The plans that we had shown the Conservation Commission, I think the last plans you saw, showed in the area in the southern part, it says temporary stockpile right here. We had a proposed detention pond there. There was some concern in that the house was out back. Some concerns that the pond was still yet remote from where the road was. We then did change the plan, brought the pond up, beginning up in the vicinity of lot number 12 in through here, and put the house further back. But what that did, given the slopes, the road is up high, but then it slopes down low. In order for us to get the volume that we needed for detention, we had a very deep pond and slopes going down, 31 slopes from the end of the road going down to the bottom were quite excessive. In talking to the Conservation Commission, they voiced their concerns about, although it was up near the road and accessible, they had concerns that it was not a good design, whereas it went straight from the road down to the bottom. They asked about fencing, they asked about landscaping to screen it. All of those items we did take to under consideration, and what we have come up with, the design that you have seen that they have not seen yet, is a detention pond to the rear off of the cul-de-sac. We have met with Public Works a couple times, and at our last meeting last week, we talked about having remote ponds that need maintenance, and the meeting that we had with them and the last one with the Conservation Commission, we had a swale that was proposed at the bottom of the lots on the west side of the project, which would be up against a 100-foot buffer. That would give a physical deterrent to people from going the other way, but maintenance was always a concern. There wasn't a lot of water being captured, but we had to try to get the water from this area down over to here so we could detain it. What we've come up with since we met with Public Works last Thursday is that we have eliminated any collection of water in behind the lots on the westerly side of the road. All our drainage on this end of the project is going into the detention pond that is out to the rear. We had taken the house that was further out and moved it up near the road. So I think that based on our design, things have finally come together. We had concerns over from Commission, from Public Works, and from the Planning Board about the placement of the ponds, where the houses were in respect to those. So I think that what we've come up here now is a good plan trying to take everybody's concerns together. At the last meeting, we talked about grading on the sites. These plans are graded out with the houses. These are all 3-bedroom houses. The actual grading may be subject to change, but we're doing this to show that we're able to get the septic designs, the driveways, all put onto the lots without interfering with the buffers that we have, with just a couple exceptions. We have asked the environmental consultant to do a function values analysis, which is being done. We have a area behind lot number 4, which is the top of the hill, which we'd like to go into the outer 100-foot buffer, about 25 feet, and we are preparing the function values analysis for that. Also, we have some grading for the access road going out to the detention pond, which is in the outer 50 feet. The yellow line you see here is the 50-foot setback, and that is being prepared to be submitted to the Conservation Commission so it can come back to here. In our discussion last week with Public Works, we have some catch basins here which have sumps in them, and they would go into what it's shown on the plans that you have originally submitted, a 4-bay area here in the front of the detention pond. What Public Works had decided that they much rather have a deeper sump because they have equipment to suck those sumps out, as opposed to have to go physically do any cleanup in a 4-bay area. So with that, we have changed our catch basins to 4-foot sumps, which means we don't have to have the 4-bay, and that was something that Public Works had suggested and we're able to do. One thing that had come up is, and it's in Brian's memo to the board, has to deal with who maintains the detention structures. In the street, catch basins and that the town does maintain. You have a truck to do that. The roads are obviously a public street. They get plowed and maintained by Public Works. Public Works does have a concern over the long-term maintenance of detention ponds, because these aren't only just detention ponds as they once were. Some of these are infiltration ponds. The water's meant to percolate down through the soil, and they do need maintenance, and maintenance based on a schedule. Public Works is concerned whether they really have the personnel to do that, and there's several, I think there's over 60, and Megan can comment, ponds in town already that may or may not be maintained as they should. If this was a townhouse development, higher density type development, we would probably have a homeowners association, and then that would be one way to privately take care of drainage. If this was a private road, we would have to have a homeowners association to take care of that as well. But we strongly prefer not to have a homeowners association, mainly because these are individual lots. Although they're close together, everybody would have an independent area to live in, and they would not have to have an association to be formed just for the maintenance of the ponds. But that in itself doesn't help the town out. Perhaps in the future there may be impact fees for stormwater maintenance that has to be put on, but right now the town does not have a structure. Some communities, as I understand through Public Works, like Manchester, may be putting becoming an actual stormwater utility, just like they have Manchester Waterworks and the sewer department. I think they're actually trying to get approved, if I understand it correctly, through PUC to be a utility company. So there they would charge everybody in town for maintenance of stormwater all over town, which the EPA through their initiatives, there's a lot more stormwater being done that has nothing to do with new development. Stormwater management that has nothing to do with development. Other places may charge a one-time fee, but this is all new. The AOT rules, as I said, which became effective beginning of 2009, have not been implemented greatly, mainly because of the economy. And what comes with new facilities also requires maintenance. How that gets maintained has not been, there's not a lot of experience here on how to do that. I think I've covered most of what we had talked about. Whether, I don't know if it was the Conservation Commission or the Planning Board that asked about landscaping. This is a rough layout. We do plan to have street trees, which will be planted. There'll be some additional fencing, white picket fencing put on. These houses, the ones that you see that are L-shaped, would have a gable end facing the road and a single-car garage coming to the side, which is a more traditional village-type house. The other houses that are rectangular are garage unders, and all the houses, as I said before, would be three-bedroom houses. We are planning to submit our plans next week to Alteration of Terrain, as well as the Wetlands Bureau for a crossing here, and also to the state for subdivision approval. Because I think we've got things worked out with our drainage to the end here, the pond itself is only going to be about 3 feet deep if it was full, which is different than where it was placed over through here. We think we're ready to submit our drainage and our reports both to Public Works for their review as well as to the state agencies. So if there's any other comments that we need from the board, we'd like to take that now. I realize we don't have a real technical session tonight because we're still waiting for the functions and values analysis as well as feedback from the Public Works again. We've also talked to the fire department. They are requesting that there be a cistern placed, but they have not viewed the plans or looked at the location to be able to come up with an actual location about where they would prefer. So we are proceeding ahead, but I think the design itself has pretty much now been finalized as far as layout for the road and what we're doing with the stormwater.
Members of the board, we have any questions for Mr. Mitchell? Yes, Jim.
Well, maybe it's more for Megan, but Mr. Mitchell rattled off a bunch of possible long-term solutions to the stormwater management issue, which I think we've become more attentive to. But I didn't hear anything that really is offering for this project, because a lot of them are things that have to be implemented on a zoning basis or going forward basis. So I guess turning it to Megan, has there been something discussed that she's going to recommend to us that we want to consider, or is that just still in the works, or is she looking to us to come up with the things?
Megan.
I think the consensus from DPW is that this is more of a long-term issue where we need to come up with kind of a town-wide plan of how we're going to handle this in the future. It's not so much that we need to come up with an answer for this subdivision. It just, each time these come forward, it makes us more aware that we have more and more of these ponds, and the new type of infiltration design and options that engineers have to choose from are more, require more maintenance than our current systems. And as you said, we've been working on coming up with a list of what we have for treatment swales and ponds in town. We have about 68 of them total. Many of them are not being properly maintained, and that's a staffing issue. It's something we need to deal with. I believe what needs to happen is Carl's going to be going to the Board of Selectmen, I think, with some suggestions and for discussion purposes to talk about how we should handle this. It may come in front of this board too, but I think that the town needs to come up with how we want to handle this. And there are multiple ideas that we talked about and bounced around, but it's not that we felt like we had to come up with a solution for this. This may be just like every other road that we've done so far, public road, public drainage, to be publicly maintained, but it's our job as DPW to work with the Board of Selectmen and come up with a plan on how we really are going to be doing that, because I think it's just getting to a point that we have more than we can handle, and so we need to start looking at that. And I don't think that's the fault of this one development. It's just been, happening over time, and it needs to be addressed.
So what you're saying is that without recommendations in terms of how we might deal with it, what we've presently been doing is the acceptable practice, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a public road with a public drainage system, everything right now, there's nothing really in place otherwise
Okay.
than for it all to be publicly maintained. But we did throw out lots of other options, but Carl thought those needed to be more discussed with the Board of Selectmen versus us just making a decision at DPW and proposing it here. He thought, we need to be consistent with what we do, and to make a decision, it needs to go to the board level and discuss it there.
As a second option, I think the planning board would be very interested, since it pertains to our development regulations, and we'd certainly like to hear from the Public Works Director in terms of directions and where things are going, so that we can be somewhat prepared too for the same scenario.
And I had asked that, do we come here first or do we go there? And I believe Carl thought the right step was to go to the selectmen first for discussion purposes, and then maybe the thought would be come here and discuss that with you, maybe as like a workshop to try and see how,
Agreed.
how both boards feel.
Jim?
I'm not sure you need to address this tonight, but the abutter to the north has been concerned about drainage, so I guess I'm going to look to you to address that either tonight or when you come back, to how this is going to function to not create a drainage or minimize whatever problem exists.
Well, I can tell you how we are planning to do it based on plan, but when we come back again, surely Megan would have had a chance to look at that as well. All the drainage from our part of the site comes downhill, and we are taking all the drainage from our roadway and going into, as well as the slope here, and putting into this infiltration detention area. So that's being infiltrated and treated before it gets released. This is a wetland through here. Here's the pond and the outlets through here. So this is the lower part of our site near the front. So everything from Montalona Road coming out to the south is all coming down to our area through here. And everything from here where it goes back uphill, we either go back into the wetland here or out to the pond and then be discharged. So we're not discharging any of our water to the north. Actually, our water's coming down to the south. If the abutter you're speaking of perhaps is up over here off-site, we have a lot of wetlands in through here, and we plan to discharge our drainage, so between the infiltration and what needs to discharge, so that we're not going to have any impact as far as increase the rate of runoff from the site. But Megan can confirm with that too.
Other members of the board? Since this is a public hearing, are there any members of the public wishing to speak in reference to this project at this time? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward.
How's everybody tonight?
Good.
I'm Jacqueline Gagnon. I'm the neighbor to the north. And I was listening to the bigger issues that are being talked about tonight, but I do want to talk about drainage. I was taken by the remark that was made about the drainage design proving to be a challenge, and then talking about, well, we're doing it with a couple of exceptions, and we only want to go 25 feet. And I think that, variance isn't always the answer, and having exceptions to our rules isn't always the answer. Sometimes the answer is to change the plan, and I hope that you stay open-minded about the possibility that maybe the answer is not to bend the rules, it's to change the plan. And if we are going to have long-term problems, why are we sneaking another problem in? Why don't we take care of the long-term solution before we sneak in another problem? But drainage is my key concern. I put a letter forward to the board way back in May, asked it to be read into the record. I'm only going to confine my remarks to what I understand now is my business, which is my property value. That curve in the road, or that first 320 feet, it's my understanding that it curves downhill both directions towards the curve. And my wetland specialist, who's spoken before this board before, advises me that just 3 inches of rain, which is not uncommon, is going to put more than 2,000 cubic feet of water running in that direction. So I don't know what the distance is of that infiltrated collection area from my property, but 2,000 cubic feet of water is a lot of water. And if that area needs to be maintained and there's no plan for it being maintained, that water is going to affect my property. It's going to. I've had, as you know, effect to my property already, both with flooding in my basement increasing over the period of time that this area was logged, as well as the damage to my in-ground pool that resulted in having to replace the liner because of the pressure of the groundwater just bubbling up and flooding that area. So I'm interested in what the proximity is of that area to my property and what the plan is going to be to maintain and make sure that it's cleared and operating properly, because it's going to be a serious problem to my property. I'm also concerned about the ownership and management of the open space. I'd like to see the board really address that. In particular, the control and restriction of motorized vehicles in the open space. This area is being overrun with motorized vehicles. What do they call them? The four-wheelers that are doing a lot of damage to the property. So, you know, looking at this plan, what is the developer's responsibility to purchase and install barriers and gates and put signage if this is not going to be turned into an ATV park? I say this because this area that's being proposed for development is a high density. It is a high density housing development in an area that is agricultural, where the houses are far apart. There's plenty of wooded land, there's plenty of wildlife, there's plenty of recreational outdoor opportunities, but that area has been completely stripped of vegetation, and there's going to be tremendous noise pollution as it is, and this is already, in my opinion, impacting my property value, because I'm losing the quality of life that I enjoyed as an abutter, the peace and quiet and the privacy of the neighborhood, the amount of traffic, the amount of 17 weed whackers, 17 lawnmowers, 17 leaf blowers. Because there's no vegetation there, that noise is going to impact my life and my privacy. So, those are my primary concerns. I had other concerns about the safety of the bus picking up kids on the road, because there is a tremendous sun blindness. It's going to start in about 7 or 8 weeks. You're going to have tremendous sun blindness as you drive towards Manchester on that road, and it's extremely dangerous. And I would hope that the board would consider that as well, because it's just not safe for the kids. You see kids walking their dogs on that road, and it's just really dangerous. Thank you.
I have a question of you. You mentioned a consultant who advised you that a certain amount of drainage. Can you explain? You said 2,000 cubic feet?
Well, if you take it, there's like road surface, impermeable surface, and you take just the first 320 feet and you put 3 inches of water running off of that, the accumulated effect of that water is going to be over 2,000 cubic feet by whatever mathematical formula they, calculate the movement of water. But that's a huge amount of water.
But yes, it is a lot of water. It's more than in my swimming pool. But I think in the analysis, the drainage analysis will be thoroughly reviewed by the Public Works Department, and I'm sure, at least I have all the faith, that they'll catch any errors and omissions and make sure the drainage is done properly up there to assure that that doesn't happen. And I think there are other people who will be reviewing that plan also. Carlos.
Can I pursue that a little further?
Yes.
Did I hear you correctly that you said your certified wetland scientist rendered an opinion relative to the runoff?
I asked him to look at the plans initially with me, because I have not, we talked about way back, Mr. Raymond talked about bowling alley roads and aesthetics, and we have 2 bowling alley roads in that neighborhood already. We have Ledgewood and we have Serenitas. You can walk all the way down Serenitas and you never see a house. To me, that's more aesthetically pleasing than walking into this, neighborhood that's an inner city neighborhood.
I just wanted to
But
pursue
aesthetics aside, yes, I had him look at that road because I didn't like the idea that there's 2 parts of the road, both going downhill, that is closest to my property. That's the area that's closest to my property.
Can I ask you who that wetland scientist was?
Peter Spear.
Is Peter Spear a professional engineer?
He's appeared before this board as a wetland specialist.
My question is he a professional engineer?
I don't
Qualified
believe
to
he's an
render
engineer.
opinions relative to engineering analysis?
No, he's a wetland
Okay.
specialist.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not an engineer either. I just pump my basement.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Anybody else?
Any other
Thank
members
you.
of the board have a question, Jacqueline? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wishing to speak in reference to this particular project and its application? Yes, Eric?
I'd just like to give an additional piece of information. We've talked with the Conservation Commission at length, and Keith Martell, the representative from Blackbriar, has talked to both the Scottaquag, I don't know if it's River Council now or what the name of that is, the Conservancy Group, and we talked with the commission. What our proposal would be is to have the land itself deeded to the town, so the open space would be owned by the town. We are providing public access, and that the conservation easement would be held by Piscataqua. And the maintenance will be done by Piscataqua to make sure that it's maintained. Keith has to put up an escrow account or money for perpetual maintenance by Piscataqua. We don't have the agreements and everything written right here, but I believe they're going to be before the selectmen. That is an attempt by us to have all of that in the public domain and protected and looked at by a separate agency. We really also did not want to have 17 different homeowners have actually an ownership interest. They have no other ownership interest any more than anybody else in town. And we had provided a couple parking spaces in the front where they can walk down the trail here, keep on going out. We still will have access with the trail coming out to the back here. And there's other access points to the property as well. So just to answer that question, we are proposing the town to own it, but the Scottaquag will have the easement as well as the requirement to maintain that.
I'm not sure how other board members feeling about the town taking on the responsibility of property and taking it off the tax rolls.
Well, and I can just say that PLC has not voted to assume such responsibilities as a board member. I can say that.
In answer to your question, it doesn't have a lot of value once it's a restriction, so
Well, I don't know. But I mean, I
wouldn't let that drive the bus, but.
No, I know. I don't think it would either, but I'm just questioning whether, and we'd want to hear from the selectmen whether they want to assume ownership of this parcel. And we'd like to hear about that fairly soon. So can we depend on you Phil, to broach that subject and provide the board with some input and expertise?
As long as I have the help of our esteemed planner, Brian.
Okay. I'm, as long as we can come up with some advice to the board as to how we should proceed, and it's favorable to the selectmen.
No, and I understand your question because every time we're presented with the opportunity to accept land, that's always a question that comes up when you own land, also management and resources, and it costs money.
Okay. Any other members of the board have any questions for Mr. Mitchell? Any thoughts or comments about the design, layout, anything that's kind of broad? The details are going to be forthcoming. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot more detail in reference to the concept of and the layout of this particular project.
I'll just say I'm not too keen into going into setback areas. I mean, we enacted these setback areas, and all we see is application after application going into them. I'm not too keen about it.
In what setback areas are you concerned about,
Well, I
Barbara?
think there was two, that you requested.
Some of the wetland setbacks?
Yeah.
Obviously, we have areas where we cross into the setback for our roadway through here.
Yep.
But we have some in the back of lot number 4 and number 3, and access to the detention pond here, which will also be the open space, is between the 50-foot line and the 100-foot line.
Right.
Board members, any particular comments, references, excursion into the wetland setback areas on the site by the buildings? Okay. Seeing none.
I mean, I just think it's significant when you have to go into the wetland setback to manage the drainage for wetlands.
I did notice that there is some grading that extends into wetland setbacks.
Yeah. There's a lot of extension into
We've had some serious
setbacks.
discussions about that in the past.
Are we still waiting a report from the Conservation Commission on that, or do we have that? I didn't.
We don't have a written report from the
So
Conservation
we're waiting
Commission.
on that. Okay. We're gonna see what it is.
Yes. Other members of the board? Then I would anticipate that the applicant would work prudently with the staff and Public Works to move the project forward and refine the engineering details in such a fashion that our experts employed by the town can assure us that it meets our standards and what have you. But I would entertain a motion to continue to, and I would ask Eric,
October.
in terms of timing, when would you anticipate wanting to be back to the board for a continued working on this application?
Copy of Brian's staff report, recommendation that he had was October 14th, and I think that's appropriate because the final drainage design will be sent to the state as well as the Public Works next week, and that'll give them more than the 3 weeks they need to review that and have some back and forth. So I think a month from now we would be able to do that.
So you're wishing to come back here before you have final state approval on those kinds of issues?
Yes, because we still want to work through any other issues that may come up and provide additional answers. By then, we would hope to have met with the selectmen as far as relative to ownership of the open space and that, and try to work through those issues.
Members of the board, I would entertain a motion for continuance. So move for October 14th?
Second?
Motion by Phil, seconded by Carlos. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recognizing that Barbara will object, may we take our 8:30 break?
You-
before
Well, we have,
See the eyes?
we have one more, which will take a while.
we have one more application to review this evening, and I think it would be appropriate to take a 10-minute recess. So moved.
So moved.
So ruled.
landscaping business located on property along with residence, and to build a 2,400 square foot barn for the business. Bonia Revocable Trust, Patty Hill Road, zone agricultural, continued from the July 22nd, 2010 meeting. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've gone through a lot of this before, but I'll just briefly mention it for those who have maybe not been here before. The property is located on Patty Hill Road. 177 Patty Hill Road is the address, on the west side of Patty Hill. It's an elongated property shown in red there on the map. This is an old aerial of the property prior to when any work has been done on the property. There's some additional photos from more recent in 2006 when work had started to be done and the salt shed had been added. I'll just go through those quickly. The request has been to approve a site plan for the landscape business on the subject property. The applicant did get a variance approved on January 6, 2009, allowing a landscape business in the agricultural zone property with 25-foot setbacks rather than the required 100-foot setback. That variance required additional screening of all materials and equipment on the property, as well as a floor to their salt shed. This is an existing conditions map, just detailing out what the property currently looks like. I'll not spend a lot of time here either. This is the proposed site plan. The applicant is proposing a barn in this location here to move the salt shed, which is currently about here, over to here, and then to propose to add some storage bins of mulch and other landscape materials along the north side there, as well as move their fueling station from the south side over in here to this location here, and to create a concrete pad in front of the fueling station to for vehicles to be able to fuel up on that location and to avoid spilling. This is just some additional pages from your site plan packet. This is a view of a cut through of what it would look like from the McAlery property as far as how tall the building would be. This is a representation of the height of the building currently right here, and that, or not currently, but as proposed. This is representation of where one would be standing and seeing and viewing any portion of the property down below. This is just a representation of the drainage plan. As you can see, the drainage is in the form of several detention basins along the south side of the property, with outflows into the ditch that's down below along the property line border. They've also got some detention out here next to the entrance to the property, closer out towards Patty Hill Road, which would be between the Gibson property here and where they would be doing this employee parking. This is their driveway plan, just showing the location of the driveway and how that's to be configured. They also gave some site distance drawings there, just cutting off the existing topography that is there and making it a more smooth transition. These are the proposed elevations. Since the last meeting, the applicant has removed the cupola from the top, which was a concern for height. So this height now conforms to the regulations in the zoning ordinance. There's also some elevations that have been provided of the salt shed. Just a standard siding salt shed with 3 sides enclosed, and the front to be open, remaining open for access to fill up the trucks with salt. As far as key considerations, there are wetlands on the property, but DES has submitted a letter stating that is inconclusive that a wetland was filled with the work that has been done. Abutter Dean Gibson has contested that question and asked for a peer review. The peer review was done and is included in your packet. The letter came from Linda Magoon from the DES. She upheld the original decision from the wetland reviewer that had determined that no conclusive evidence was found that a wetland had been filled. Staff has reviewed the most recent site plan submitted by the applicant and has provided comments in the form of conditions of approval in the staff report. Those are listed at the end of the report. Some additional key considerations. The salt shed does show a concrete pad to be put on the floor. The salt shed also has a pad in front of it, as well as the fueling station has a pad in front of it for any spilling that would help towards the environmental concerns of spilling. The max height is 33, we already discussed that. 35, I'm sorry. The applicant does not need an alteration of terrain permit according to the DES. This is a DES determination, and therefore staff is not going to go further than that. The variance states that there be additional screening of material and equipment, and that all buildings and materials shall meet the 25-foot setback. Staff feels that those requirements have been met by their landscape plan, and in seeing their site plan, there are no encroachments on the 25-foot setback with buildings and materials. This is just a little bit of a timeline. The applicant began grading the site back in 2004. They built a shed with no permit. They were notified sometime between by Mr. Derek Horn of the violation in 2005, I believe, and I forgot to put that on the timeline. But the applicant got an electrical permit from the town, and this is a piece of information that I don't believe has been shared before with the planning board, for one service outlet. So I think the point that is trying to be made with that is that they were attempting to follow some sort of a process, and did not ignore every single rule, despite the fact that several things were done without permits. Subsequent to that, they submitted for their variance in 2008. They got their variance approved in early 2009, and they submitted for their site plan in early 2010, and we're now working on all the public hearings for site plan. They also were issued a letter from the town stating that the salt shed and fueling station should be discontinued. That has since been discontinued, and also the salt shed has been emptied so that no further contamination can result from salt being there. This is a table from the last time regarding the salt testing of the properties, so I'm not going to repeat any of this information, but it's here in case it's brought up again, so that's just for information. There's no waivers being requested. This is just a photo that I had included last time, minus the cupola, so that's the only one that's left. But that would be a potential That's my best rendering at what it might look like from the McAlery property if the barn were in place, showing that the trees would initially provide some screening to the barn. The applicant has included a landscape plan in your packet, and that landscape plan does actually show additional trees to be located in front of the barn in this location, as well as down to the side. Those trees would be 14 to 16 feet in this location tall, and then I think the trees over in this location are 12 to 14 feet tall. So they would be taller than the existing trees there, providing additional screening for that barn and for the equipment and materials on the site.
Brian, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Would those trees be 14 to 16 feet tall at planting, at time of planting?
Yes.
At planting?
Yes.
All right, I have a question further on this photo. What is this box on the left?
Right here?
Yeah.
This is Mr. McAlery's barn. It's
Is that what's this garage right
Yep.
here?
yes.
That looks closer to the trees than the other building.
That barn is only a few feet away from the property line, and is definitely taller than probably what this barn may end up being.
Did that barn get a variance for setback?
No, it did not. Back when the permit was issued, I believe it had been shown on the plan as being far enough away, and so the permit was issued.
So it wasn't
And then
built
it was
in
built
accordance with the plan?
not in accordance with the plan. So staff recommendation that we hear the applicant's presentation, continue the public hearing, and hear from the public, and then staff feels that the plan is in a sufficient nature to be approved. So our recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions that have been listed in the staff report, and any others that the board feels that they want to add during the meeting tonight. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Members of the board, do you have any immediate questions or observations for Brian before I open it up to the applicant's presentation? Seeing none, is there a representative of the applicant here wishing to present to the board?
My name is Kevin Baum. I'm an attorney with Divine Millimet representing the applicant. There's actually several representatives. I will not take much of your time. Don Duval from Duval Survey is here. He's going to present some of the changes to the plan. Expect that'll be brief. You've already seen the plan, and Brian, as always, has done a great job doing an overview. Bob Rook, the engineer, is here. He's going to explain some of the engineering, and more specifically some of the changes to the engineering based on his discussions with Megan and the town staff. And Eric Buck, who's the landscape architect, is here to present the landscaping plans that have been submitted. We're going to let them get started. Just very briefly, I just wanted to clarify a few things. The first is to just clarify from Brian's presentation the variances that were issued for this property, and just to clarify that he was Mr. Fornier was issued 2 use variances. Essentially a variance for 2 primary uses on the property, both residential and landscaping use. So the 25-foot setbacks actually apply in that case. There was no variance from the 100-foot setback because it only applies in the case of where you have landscaping as an accessory use. Since there are two primary uses, the 25-foot setback applies, and to further clarify, all of the new or structures to be moved, should the landscaping and business structures will meet that 25-foot setback. I also wanted to just indicate, so I know it has come up, that the abutters attorney has provided a letter. I'm not sure that any of you have had a chance to read it, but one of the things that he raises as a potential condition is the salt monitoring guidelines. Those mirror the guidelines that were discussed and approved by the Conservation Commission and have been provided by the applicant. And just to clarify, those were provided as it's a condition of approval. And finally, just to clarify some of the issues with the permitting, my belief is that the electrical permit was raised because it was Mr. Fournier's understanding that a building permit wasn't necessary for that type of structure, and so he or his representative only got a electrical permit. To clarify, though, both the salt shed and the fuel station will be moved and will require new permits. And finally, I know the permitting on this property has been certainly a source of contention, understandably so, and just wanted to clarify and to ask this board that we've attempted to address all the concerns with the permitting, and believe we've done so. So there may have been certainly permitting issues in the past, and we believe and hope that the reason we're here tonight is to get everything properly in order, and that's what the plans that are before you will do. So thank you, and I'll let Don Duval present, unless the board has any questions.
I have a question, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
It's just, I want to understand what the applicant's attorney said about the 100-foot, about the setbacks. I'm confused, I guess, that the provisions in 5.13 do not apply, or that a variance was granted from them.
No, that the provisions of 513 do not apply. That was the zoning board's interpretation and Derek Horn's interpretation, that some of the, and I apologize, I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but that the requirement for site plan approval applied for any landscaping use. The 100-foot setback only applied in the case of landscaping as an accessory use.
Okay, I'll ponder that.
But that was the determination you got,
That was the determination we got.
whether we agree with it or not.
Yes.
That's the determination you got.
That's right.
Thank you. Mr. Duval, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Don Duval for the applicant, Brian Fournier. Brian Rose has essentially covered everything that I normally would say. Basically, you know the existing conditions. Our intent is to build the proposed barn. Anything that was on this side of the property, the bins for the various materials, fueling station, everything is being moved away from the southerly property line, be put on the northerly line. The only thing I haven't shown on my plan, which I believe the engineer has on his, Brian had a conversation with the fire department as to the suitability, let's call it, of the fire fueling station. The only comment that the fire came up with, again, it's verbally, and we've agreed to it is that some bollards are to be placed as a safety measure around or along the front of the fueling station. I believe there's like 3 of them. We had previously submitted a sketch of how the vehicles would be placed inside the building in the shed area. During the summer, all the salt is out of the salt shed. So inside that salt shed will be placed like his salt spreaders that he'd be using during the winter. So salt spreaders is, I'm not sure if it's his bucket load, if he has one, that type of equipment will be stored inside the salt shed when it's not in use. Just for the record, there was a comment way back when about the lack of permits for the septic system. Septic system has been properly permitted and installed. Again, the entrance to the property, we are proposing to move the entrance for a little better site visibility getting into the site. Just for the comment that there was that existing barn on the abutting property, the requirement of the fire department was any new structure would be 30 feet from any abutting structure. So we have moved and we've shown our building, or our proposed building, such that it will meet the fire ordinance. Basically, I think most of what you probably want to hear is the engineering reviews and the comments with Megan. And we also have someone that's going to adjust the landscaping. As you see on my plan, I'm just showing what's existing. And as Brian mentioned, there will be additional screening placed inside or around these existing ones, and some larger ones around this area where we've showed some proposed parking during the day. I believe all the issues, as far as I understand, with the Conservation Commission, they're on board with it. They have, I don't know if I want to call it a series or a list of recommendations and procedures that are going to be handled upon approval, if that's the board's desire. So basically, as far as the survey and the layout presentation, I think Brian and what little I've given take care of all of that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I don't know if this is a fair question for Don or for somebody else, but I know it's condition of approval number 2 on the staff's recommendation. Property owner shall follow best management practices for design and construction of the salt shed and the drainage around the shed. Does this design comply with those best management practices?
As far as I know, they do. I'm not.
Do you know what they are?
I'm guessing that, I'm assuming best management is basically erosion control, and I think that's what they're talking about.
But you don't know what they are?
No,
Okay.
off the hand, no. I think Megan probably enlightened me.
If somebody else wants to address it, I just want to
Right.
find out what they are.
Yes, sir.
If I may, the DES puts out best management practices for salt sheds, but was being referred to there, that was the intent. Brian contacted Rich Walker at DES and provided the plans to him, received an email back indicating that the plans met DES's best management practices.
Do you have an email if anybody wants?
That was provided to conservation. I do not know whether it was provided to conservation, correct? It was discussed. We can certainly provide it, but the intent was to follow the published best management practices from DES.
Well, I guess I'd like the designer of the plan to tell us that's the case. I understand the applicant thinks it is and his attorney, but Don is the one who designed that, so I guess
It says I didn't design the actual salt shed and best management practices. And honestly, I know what my gut feeling is what they're talking about is basically, I think usually with the best management practice, I know when we do subdivisions, whatnot, is basically usually concerned with runoff, erosion control, so when you're digging, placing your materials that you're not having runoff go onto abutting properties.
Thank you.
I don't think it has anything to do, best management practice, I don't believe has anything to do with the physical construction of the shed.
Those
Yes,
best,
sir.
yeah, if I may, those best management practices are published in a DES fact sheet that has been provided, so it's on the record, it's been provided to this board and the, planning, staff. I don't believe I have a copy tonight, but it is a list, and to clarify, there are some, it doesn't only deal with drainage, it does deal with the actual structure, and, we have plans of that structure as well with it.
Are you saying that the best management practices has been supplied to the staff?
It's a DES fact sheet that has been supplied.
Okay,
Prior.
all right.
It was submitted prior.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in my pile here, I'm just asking.
Too many meetings.
At a last meeting.
All right, you still have the floor, Don.
I think if that takes care of, the site presentation, I'll probably, turn it over to Bob Brook to ask, answer any questions you may have with the,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think maybe this would be actually an appropriate time for Megan to discuss, like, drainage that she's been
okay, I was gonna work it either.
talking about with you guys.
Okay, fine by me.
You're
Do you
on.
wanna hear from me, or do you wanna hear from their?
Oh, I wanna hear,
Yeah,
well-
and have an engineer talk about drainage?
I think the engineer would be more qualified to talk about drainage.
Yeah.
And so we'll wait for the engineer's presentation, and we can kind of combine the two, if I may. Please.
Okay,
Mr. Rook?
Throw it on top of mine or what? Mine? Yeah, one sec.
Good evening, my name is Bob Rook, I'm a registered professional engineer in New Hampshire and 4 other states. I received some comments that I think you're referring to on Tuesday morning. And I did, with a lot of assistance with Megan, actually revise the plans to address the comments in that report. Resubmitted the plans with new drainage calculations on Wednesday. And I've worked through with Megan yesterday and today, and I believe that we're all resolved. I do have copies, there were minor revisions made to the plans. I do have reduced copies for each of the board members if they'd like them.
Please.
Hope I got it right. Thank you. First, I'd like to go through the revisions that were made to the plans. The first are kind of clerical, kind of in the order that they were presented in the comments. We were asked to hatch the driveway to make it a little more visible and to make the driveway bolder, just to make it stand out on the plans. So those are kind of easy ones. Based on a prior revision that dealt with the grading in the back of the shed, there were some discrepancies between the elevations shown on the plans and some of the elevations shown in the construction details. I've clarified those elevations, and now they match. There was some language that was suggested to be added to note number 4, which is now up in the corner. I've added that language verbatim right out of the recommendations that we received from staff. Bollards have been added at the front of the fuel shed, as Don has mentioned. And the primary issue was resolve the remaining drainage issues. So I'd like to get into a little bit of detail on the drainage system. The flow comes from north to south, and we decided that because of the terracing, basically the terracing of the existing site, these ponds have to be level by their nature. We broke it up into 5 detention ponds, 4 here, 1 down in the corner, which kind of follows the existing contours of the site. Each of the ponds has a low-level outlet and then an overflow designed to accommodate both a 50 and a 100-year storm with a foot of freeboard. So those have been resolved. Each pond will have a depth of approximately 1'9" or 1'10" for the 50-year storm. Comparing the pre-development and the post-development flow, we analyzed the pre-development flow for a 25-year storm. And then we made sure that the post-development flow for a 50-year storm was less than or equal to the pre-development 25-year flow. In all of the ponds, each of the ponds individually, the post-development 50-year flow is less than the pre-development 25-year flow. So it occurs for the site as a whole and in each one of the ponds individually. There's a dry well system here that takes just the roof drainage. There's a swale behind to take drainage coming from the north and direct it into the detention pond. I'll get into a lot more detail as the questions come up, but I just want to reiterate that the pre-development, post-development flows, post-development are less. And then we do have 1 foot of freeboard in a 50-year, not only in a 50-year storm, but also in a 100-year storm. I'd like to thank Megan for, I dropped this on her yesterday, and then we talked through today, and she did take some time to review the plans. And I believe she's in concurrence that we've addressed all of the comments relative to drainage.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Jim.
Speaking as a complete non-engineer, but we heard comment and testimony at the last hearing, I believe, about the potential instability of the banking on the southern edge of the property where the detention ponds or basins are located. Do you have a chance to look at that banking and have any?
Yes, and I have looked at it, and I also, part of the design, make sure that what we did was to keep the high water flow during the 50-year storm. In this pond, it's at least 8 feet away from the corresponding elevation on the slope. In most cases, it's 10 to 12 feet in these. The filling was done, I believe, in 2004. Due to the freeze-thaw cycle, everything is compacted at this point in time. My professional opinion is because we've kept them away from the top of the bank, and these are actually excavated into the site. It's not a fill situation. It's actually the bottom of these ponds are 3 feet lower than the bank adjacent to it. So we're actually cutting into the site. And having these ponds with the outlets that are proposed actually, in my opinion, improves not having the flow come directly over the site and down the slope unimpeded. This is a slow release outlet at the low level, and you only have flow here during the 50 and the 100-year storms. My opinion is not an issue.
I'd like to ask a question in terms of the slope. And I'd ask you, Megan, the same thing. The slope, when we look at site plans, what is the generally accepted slope ratio for site development plans? Is it 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1?
That's what we're talking about. If it's on the edge of a road, we have requirements for slopes off roads and swales, but there's no restriction when you're building your site. That's why sometimes you see vertical retaining walls, things like that. There's no restriction on.
But if you have a slope, what I'm leading up to, if we know we have a slope of 2 to 1, say, there's a prescribed methodology to stabilize that banking?
No, there's all kinds of different methodologies. there's,
Is one, are methodologies proposed in this design solution to stabilize that banking?
there's no, like, new, we really just, they've added a note about stabilizing it additionally if needed. I went out and looked at it, and, you know, it's growing with grass and appears to be fairly stable. I don't see any major erosion happening anywhere. You know, if we were gonna get really picky about, do we see any exposed gravel in a spot that looks a little bare, I'm sure I could find one or two spots, or like, you know, if I'm gonna be really picky and say, add a little more loam and seed to this spot or that spot. But does it look like an unstable slope that's washing away or eroding from storms on a regular basis? No, it doesn't. Is it a steep slope? Yes, it's a steep slope. But it appears to be stabilized and not causing any ongoing problem. There's all kinds of ways to do additional stabilization if the board felt as though that was needed. I don't feel as though it needs to be rebuilt and restabilized. The note was added kind of for protection if it gets to a point that it needs some additional stabilization, that can be dealt with. I didn't find it necessary to require it to be rebuilt in any manner or at a lesser slope. Because again, I don't think we put that restriction on other site plans. I think you can have a slope as steep as you want as long as it's stabilized and functions.
Okay.
All of the
Yes.
proposed construction is no steeper than 3 to 1.
That's a proposed construction.
Right.
That's not the existing conditions, right?
No, that's what Megan was talking about.
Okay. Carlos?
I guess I want to follow up a little more on the concern of the stability of the slopes. And if we put in detention basins, how are they to be finished off? And I guess to expand upon that a little bit, are you able to prevent the soils in that fill section from becoming saturated by water infiltrating down through the bottom and there perhaps destabilizing those slopes in any manner? I mean, is that a concern? Did you look at that?
I haven't looked at the specific soils. There is a low-level outlet, so the ponds will drain over time. So it is a detention pond. It is built 3 feet lower than the current.
I guess what I'm wondering is, should we consider lining those ponds like with a clay liner or something so that we don't get saturation of the soils and thereby perhaps compromise those fill slopes?
In my opinion, it would be better to infiltrate, provide groundwater recharge. I don't see a slope stability issue because of the distance that we've kept these ponds away from the slope itself.
Okay.
I think the groundwater infiltration is the way things are going now is a better solution.
I just want to make sure we considered that, because I know that's a concern.
That's why we kept them away
Okay, thank you.
8, 10, 12 feet from the banking.
Members of the board have any other questions for Mr. Rook? Jim?
I don't know if Mr. Rook is the proper recipient, but I'll have to say this. Given this applicant's creative interpretation of some of our rules, what assurance do we have that these will be built as designed? Are we going to have an on-site inspector? Are we going to require certification from the applicant's engineer that they're built in accordance with the plan? I frankly don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling.
That was one of my notes on the back of my list, is that inspections of the work by the municipality at the owner's expense.
Okay, so we'll have to create an inspection. So I have to just listen to Mr. Rourke about the placement, the distance from the slope seems to be of some significance. We want to have assurance that they're built in accordance with the plan.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Jim. It's a pretty tight site. There's not a lot of room for error in placement of whether it's detention ponds or structures or any of these other things. So I think we can condition approval to require an as-built and that it conforms with the design specs.
So Mr. Rourke was thinking that would be reasonable. It's not his call.
Yeah, I believe you. Minister Megan and her staff would monitor the construction to move.
Well, I think that's a question of who should bear that burden, and whether the town is fairly the one to do it, or do we require the applicant to hire a person to certify to the town, like Mr. Rourke or somebody. And that's a question for Megan on her capacity. But
I'll ask her right now. Megan, which do you prefer? It's going to be all your fault.
On some previous site plans, we had hired it out because they were larger, like Abington condos. that was there haven't been many site plans where the board has wanted inspections. It's more of a newer thing that we've been doing. And so with Abingdon Square, it was left to be either the town or town's representative. And in that case, because of everything we have going on, we hired that out to, I think, VHB, and they did the inspections over there. Because that was a fairly
Big
large
site.
project,
That's
a
a
lot
big
to
site,
inspect.
yeah.
And this is not that big, so I don't think it's a huge deal for us to take on some inspections, you know what I mean? And, charge them out or whatever, like we would if it was a new public road or something.
Okay.
It's just gonna be a lot less expensive, obviously, than a larger site, public road.
But it'd be your responsibility to determine whether it was you or it was a consultant that the town hired at the owner's expense, is that correct?
Say that again, it would be my.
It'd be up to the Department of Public Works to determine whether they did it in-house or a consultant was employed at the owner's expense.
Yes, we usually kind of look at when they're about to start construction, where are we at, and do we have the time to handle that, and if not, then we can hire them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Roque? Yes, Jim?
Again, I'm not sure how much falls within your bailiwick, but given what appears to be a runoff issue involving salt, and also I have concerns about the fuel system, although it's certainly in a better location. Does your design address those, or were you dealing with the water?
Water, but any flow that's coming north to south will wind up in one of these ponds.
Do those treat or just detain?
Similar to because of the extended detention, there is some treatment, similar to the old treatment swales and things like that. Because the water's detained, it settles out finer particulates, and I can't tell you the chemistry, but the grasses in the ponds treat somehow. I don't know the chemistry myself.
Well, have they been designed to those standards or not? I mean,
Yes, they have.
So these designed as grass?
I think it calls for them to be seeded, all these slopes to be seeded, lumen seeded, including the interior of the detention ponds?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Roque. Is there another presenter?
Yes, Eric Buck on the landscaping.
Good evening. My name is Eric Buck. I'm a registered landscape architect in the state of New Hampshire with Pollock Land Planning. Here tonight to present the proposed landscape plan to add to the screening for the proposed development. The plan shows here the darker circles are the existing trees that have already been planted. It's a mix of fir and spruce trees.
Do we have this in front of us?
It was in our packet, and it was,
Did you get a copy of this?
The darker circles are the existing conifer trees that are there now. They're a mix of fir and spruce trees ranging anywhere from 6 to 13 feet in height. We're proposing a mix of both evergreen and deciduous trees and shrubs to go in amongst those on the inward side, mostly of the existing trees. The trees that are going to be installed range in height from 10 feet to 16 feet. The conifer trees are 12 to 14 feet at the time of installation. The deciduous trees, maples and birches, are going to be in the 10 to 14 foot range, all of them having a caliper size of 2.5 to 3 inches, the diameter of the trunk. Additionally, we're proposing a lower understory planting to help add some aesthetic value to the screening. That's going to be a mix of native dogwoods, forsythia, and viburnum, another flowering native shrub. The goal is to screen not only the proposed barn, but also all the storage facilities, the fuel station, the salt shed, the dumpster, We're just trying to sort of infill and increase what has already been installed. I do have a rendering of what the proposed landscaping will look like up against the sides of the proposed barn. You can see the mix of conifer evergreen trees as well as deciduous. Are there any questions?
Members of the board, Jim?
I assume Mr. Fournier maybe has some skill in this department, but what's your recommendation on ensuring survival of trees?
Following the
Let
standards.
me preface that. We've had them been planted and they go by another year and they look spindly and dead.
I mean, the plans call for guarantee of a year of health. That's sort of the industry standard. The American Nursery Association requires that. Mr. Fournier, being a landscape contractor, I'm guessing is going to install his own plant material. So I don't know if I don't believe Goffstown has any. This may fall under the inspection, post-inspection end of things. But if they're installed following the standards, the industry standards are in the plan set, the likelihood of survival is good.
I mean, we could always impose more stringent conditions. We may want to extend that out to 3 years to monitor them and assure 75% survival rate at the end of 3 years.
I want some performance standard built in.
I mean, wetlands restoration requires 75%.
After 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, is that where we got that from? I thought that was pretty clever off the top of your head.
I assume that the species you're using are salt tolerant in and
Yes.
around the salt storage area?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I should probably clarify here that my rendering may bring a few questions. I mean, I'm showing plants grow, so I mean that's sort of what we're trying to achieve here. I don't want to give the impression that this is what it's going to look like the day that the plant material is installed, but the material that is going in is larger than what is there and will provide more screening than what is.
Just for our edification then,
Yeah.
how many years' growth do you think your renderings represent?
The deciduous trees will grow at a rate of about a foot to 18 inches a year, and the conifers will be more in the 10 to 12 inches a year.
Carlos?
Since we're talking about material handling here and the potential for material coming on site and leaving the site, I think there ought to be some provisions for controlling invasive species, for monitoring for invasives and, removal of invasives if they happen to.
Within the landscape areas, or?
Well, it's just part of our approval. I don't know whether it's notes on the landscape plan or how we want to require that, but I think we ought to consider that.
How would you?
Yes, Barbara. You have a question?
I'm just wondering how you would ever incorporate that into.
We require removal. If they establish themselves on the site, they need to be removed. That's all, so they don't, and properly disposed of, so that they don't spread.
Follow, are you talking about a certain species? Are you talking about invasive? I mean, are you talking about like any weeds?
No, invasive species, and then there's lists, and I'm sure you're aware of.
Oh, okay, all right.
There's specific species that are considered to be invasive that.
Just a clarification of what.
And it's not unusual when you're moving materials around to take the seed source and bring it to a new area, and then it establishes itself someplace else in town. Now we've got a problem.
No, I understand.
Isn't that how we got the Japanese knotweed in town?
Isn't that right?
They were trying to eradicate?
Purple loosestrife, a few other things like that.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions from Mr. Butler? Thank you. Any other presenter for the applicant? Members of the board, do we have any questions of the applicant at the moment?
Excuse me?
Yes, sir. Are you representing the applicant?
Yes, I am. My name is Dwight Lovejoy.
Can you please come forward and
I'm sorry.
Have a seat, and you can talk to us.
My name's Dwight Lovejoy, and licensed master electrician, and the issue was brought up about permits and everything. And first of all, I negotiated from the beginning with Mr. McAlery and Mr. Fournier, so there wouldn't be another set of poles on the property. Mr. McAlery was worried about the view and all that. From that, we did get a permit, and we installed a 200 amp service for future. And while we were there, I told Mark, the building inspector, he was worried about a cord running from the barn, and we took care of that. So we've been back several times, and I've never hidden anything from Mark, and I just want to keep that straight.
Okay,
All right?
thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak in favor, for the applicant? Seeing none, I'll open it up to public comment. Anybody wishing from the public wishing to speak?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have a question on the salt chloride monitoring guidelines. I don't know when you want to go there, but whether you want to go there so the applicant can address that, or do it at the end, I don't care where.
I mean, it was in our packet, there was a package reference that, and I believe there was some indications of time and content and how often and what have you.
Yeah, and just,
we can certainly discuss it now, yes, if you'd like.
I guess one is this the proposal by the applicant? I assume it is. It's just suspended in our,
Mr. Chairman?
it's on page 5.
Yes.
This is
Okay.
it's taken from the Conservation Commission, what they arrived at, because it mirrors what their recommendation is. That's the understanding that I have.
I believe, my understanding is this article is consistent with this Concom's
Right.
concern for salt
Exactly.
monitoring.
Okay.
As a recommendation to the board, as being maybe the minimum standards to go by? That was what I was told.
Well, I guess I'd like to know is if this is the applicant's proposal based on its discussion with the Conservation Commission.
I'll ask the applicant. Are you aware of this document?
Yes.
And is this consistent with the discussions and conclusions of the Concom when you presented?
Yes. A draft of this document was presented to the Conservation Commission at their meeting on, I believe, August 25th. Based on discussions at that meeting, they asked for some revisions, and these guidelines represent the revisions that were made by the applicant to reflect their comments.
Okay.
And it's being submitted by the applicant as a proposed condition of approval.
So has the Conservation Commission seen this?
I don't know. You mean this revised document?
Correct.
It was,
Yes, sir.
I should back up. I'm not sure. It was provided to the planning staff. I think the intent was that it go to Conservation Commission, but I don't know.
Okay.
I was there that night.
Excuse me, Mr. Fournier, correct?
I was there that night, and we went through everything with them. Basically what it was is, this was what they wanted, the revised, the look, we took it exactly the way they voted it, and that's what we put into the note. They wanted for 3 years, and then being brought to, planning and conservation to be looked over every year to make sure that the sodium levels weren't increasing.
Okay. Thank you.
He just held up, we don't have.
Thank you.
Yes, Jim?
I have a substantive question. And I'm not sure the Conservation Commission is necessarily the authority on this, but in the enforcement paragraph, and I know the Conservation Commission has this, talks about the 250 milligram per liter, which is the maximum contaminant level permitted by DES. But there's a difference between maximum and desired. And if you have a use that has contributed substantially to salt contamination, arguably, what is the proper standard? Is it the maximum permitted, or is it some higher standard? Why is that? Because that's the maximum permitted. Why is that the appropriate standard that has to be used? Let me give you an example. If you had that in your water supply, would you notice it? It may not be detrimental to health, but I'm not sure that's the sole, or is that the level that they've just decided is beyond, below which they can't measure effects? I don't know what that means.
I agree, and you don't want to be taking action at the threshold level. And in fact, 11F says if the test results show the levels exceed the maximum, then we're going to take some action. I mean, that shouldn't be. I mean, it should be, if the tests show that the levels approach, I don't know, pick a number, 200, which is below the 250 threshold, then it needs to be, I mean, we need to look at it a little more carefully, I think, but to say that if it exceeds the level, it's already too late.
That's my concern, I guess.
Barbara?
I understand the points, but I don't hear anybody here with any basis or any presentation for making it a lower number, nor do I understand whether the test sites are consistent necessarily with any contaminant beyond that point in excess of that level. I mean, that's one of the reasons you have the test sites where they are. It's not the final, necessarily the final distribution site. I mean, I just think you can regulate yourself to death without any reason or basis. I mean, I think there's a reason there's the limits, that you're not testing it 100 feet from the site, you're testing it at test sites on the site. I just would like, in further point of this, I'd just like some clarification, because I believe Mr. Fournier held up something that doesn't look exactly like what we have. We have on page 5 of our packet a sodium chloride, if Mr. Fournier wants to look up, revocable trust, and it says sodium chloride monitoring sample, and then it has, yeah.
You can approach, please, come up.
And then at the bottom it has some sites. Is that what you have? Is it just different font? It just looked remarkably... Okay, you just held it up in the back of the room and it was very different, so I wanted to check.
Is it the same?
It's the same. It's the same. All right. So was this what, Mr. Fournier, what we have in our packet and what you have done before or after all these comments that we got from conservation in our packet? Do you know? Or Brian, do you know?
I believe they match, however, a simple comparison of each of the comments against
Well, all right,
the
okay, so,
report itself
but we could make them both, because I'm just noticing that there's something about silt and some other stuff in the conservation guidelines that I don't think are in this document, but as long as I think the intent is to have both. The applicant has tried to match them. If there's not some overlap, they're both going to be controlling. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions at the moment? I'll open it up to the public, or try to again.
Sorry.
Yes, sir. Please step forward. Let us know who you are.
I will indeed. Thank you very much. My name is Jed Catlin. I'm an attorney with Baldwin and Catlin, and I represent both the abutters, north and south, John McAlary and Dean and Teresa Gibson. I did submit by email a letter earlier today that some of you may have received. I apologize that it only came today, but as it turns out, it's premature having come today because you got more technical information even later than that that I haven't had a chance to look at. But I can speak to what I know and ask that you deal appropriately with the fact that you've only just gotten calculations, for instance, about the drainage coming into you today. I have brought with me several copies of my letter for those of you who weren't able to get copies of the email that were sent around, so I'm happy to hand those out. And additionally, I have copies of the attachments that didn't come by email, so I don't want to flood you with paper, but I want to
They did get it all.
we all have your letter.
You all got it. And as to the attachments were not there, I brought a number of those, but those are both items that are in your file. So if you confirm that you have them, I won't need to flood you again. The two attachments.
We actually did copy the attachments and
You
send
did?
them.
Okay, I didn't send them to you, but you noticed what they were. Thank you very much. Then I'll not burden you. Why don't I give you an original for that's signed, and one to opposing counsel. All right, I'll try to be quick. It's very late, and I apologize, but if all due respect, I have to do my client justice and not skip things that need to be said. So I'm going to speak on about 5 different topics quickly, and you know what they're going to be probably before I start. First, the detention ponds. I won't summarize my letter. You know your regs pretty well, but you know that you have authority under the site plan regs, sections 4 and 6, and appendix C and D, to deal with the detention ponds and their safety and effectiveness. It's the applicant's obligation to prove to you and do the engineering and supply the engineering to show that they will meet the standards in your appendices. And those requirements involve handling the 50-year storm and consideration of the 100-year storm, foot of freeboard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My point to you, and I hate to say this, and I hate to be in this position, is that though I was just told by the engineer that the calculations are on this sheet that he kindly handed me, or counsel handed me this evening, but I heard him testify that it was submitted, well, on its face, it's corrected 9/8. So yesterday is when this plan was produced, shared with staff yesterday and or today, and discussed today. So I want to suggest to you, for one thing, that given that the rules for site plan approval is that the application be submitted, there be public notice, so that the public can come look at things and have reasonable chance to review it and comment to you. When you start getting the critical pieces of an application on the day of the application and the hearing, public notice has failed. I, for instance, have had no chance to see this. But I would suggest, beyond the fact that it's too late and you should not act on it tonight because you yourselves haven't seen it. Megan saw it today and was thanked for being available today, proving how late this was. You haven't seen it till tonight. I haven't seen it. I don't see any calculations on it. I mean, I don't pretend to be an engineer, but I've done this work for long enough to know that though I see dimensions, though I see slopes, and though I see, out of the book boilerplate designs for the dry well and the storm drain pipe installation, and it looks all very good, nowhere on here or any of the sheets do I see any calculation of amount of flow. I don't see anywhere that there's any capacity. I don't see any volumes calculated or even indicated. I see rectangles. Where are the calculations that he's told you were supplied today to show you that, in fact, the flow from this site will not exceed pre-storm?
Mr. Callen, I'd like to suggest that the normal course of events is that those calculations are submitted on a separate document. We don't customarily get those on a set of plans.
Okay.
And they're separately submitted and reviewed by the town engineer and or other consultants as deemed necessary.
I hear you, and I hope that's true. I don't know that has been done in this case. If it has been, I'll stand corrected. But I haven't seen in the file from before, and I haven't seen today, any indication that kind of hard engineering has been done. If it is, Megan, I hope you'll correct me, but But again, I see a drawing that's almost a schematic. I don't see engineering with, I mean, even if the calculations are elsewhere, at least some volumetric, well, I'll make my point that I don't believe from what I have seen, and I haven't been able to see it, and if I haven't been able to see it, I haven't had my statutory opportunity to review and comment, sufficient engineering to carry the data proof to you and demonstrate to you, on which you can find reasonably that these ponds will capture what they need to, retain what they need to, or the engineering, and Mr. Adams, Collis Adams, asked the question, and I listened carefully to the answer. Where is the work to show what the soils are in the bank? We've been told, you've been told in previous hearings, that the bank was filled, not just excavated. You were just now told it's excavated and not filled. There's a conflict there. You've been told it wasn't compacted. The engineer just said, well, it maybe wasn't compacted when it was put in, but I think it was put in 2004. I heard from Brian and my client that he believes it was all done in 2006. Engineer said it was in 2004, so it's compacted itself by now. Well, Collis said, do you know what kind of soils? If you fill it with water, will it be waterlogged? Will it slump? Will it fall? I don't know what kind of soils there are. To me, I think there are so many engineering questions unanswered by this, I hate to say it, but rudimentary and not very detailed design, and certainly not well documented, that it would be wrong to approve that and find that it will meet your engineering standards. There is also no maintenance plan for it. If these basins are going to depend on the underdrain to not slump and not saturate the unconsolidated southern bank, as we were told they would, that was the answer a second ago, how do we know those underdrains aren't going to be clogged up? How often will they be checked and maintained? Is there a maintenance plan provided or any assurance they'll be maintained? Again, I suggest the answer is you have no idea. I have no idea. The drainage plan note 4 that was corrected and improved as of today to say that periodically monitor the stability of the southerly slope where required employ additional erosion control measures. It used to end there to ensure slope stability. Used to end there, and they've now added such as bark mulch layer, loam and seed with jute matting or silt stocks. I suggest that is a perfect indication to you that this is an inadequate plan. I mean, if the southern slopes are so uncertain as to their stability in your mind, in their mind, in the applicant's mind, because of the way they were built without permits and without site plan review in 2004 or 6 or whenever, that is the start of this earth moving, to say to the applicant or to my client who lives directly south of there, right across the line, feet from there, don't worry, they'll periodically check the stability, and during that 75-year storm, when it looks like it's starting to slump, they'll come out with a jute mat. That's too late. That isn't an adequate substitute for good engineering and a certified plan that says these slopes are stable, these soils have been tested, the compaction meets construction standards, here are the calculations on volumes and flows and velocities, all of which are part of engineering and none of which appear on the plan. Let me move on from that because I think we just simply, one last point. There was some discussion among board members and questions, well, who will review that? I would suggest that it should not be just a matter of a condition subsequent after a site plan approval that they go out and that someone, either Department of Public Works or a hired person, goes out to check whether it was done. I think this is one of those cases where you hire a professional engineer at the applicant's expense to check the engineering. You have that right. I think you have that obligation to protect the safety of my client and his land when there's going to be detention, 5 of them right on his boundary. And I think that an engineer hired to look at that would find that there isn't much engineering even to review. But that's how you will find out if these calculations really have been done. All right, let's talk about salt for a moment. Just to be sure, you have absolute authority to require that this continued discharge of that pollutant, salt, be discontinued. And I just cite you to Section 4B1C of your regs, where you are to prevent injury to health, safety, or property by reasons of undesirable elements of pollution, which might be harmful, etc. You have lots of evidence, some of it conflicting, admittedly, that there is salt contamination of the soil and the groundwater already. You have different numbers from the different testing, and as we just discussed, 250 milligrams per liter of chlorides is the secondary maximum contaminant level under this Federal Safe Drinking Water Act for drinking water. It is the limit after which it is actionable. It is actually not a health-based limit because salt water doesn't kill you little bits at a time. It is actually based on taste. It's when people take their water and say, "Oof, I don't want to drink this anymore." And that's a problem if people don't drink water. So the federal standard is based on aesthetics and taste. But that's the limit. And as Collis pointed out, to not require or be concerned until and unless the groundwater already exceeds the drinking water standard is not too soon, I would suggest, but perhaps too late. Let me clarify that there was much talk about the proposed monitoring program that applicant proposed, Conservation Commission commented on, and staff rewrote and put into staff recommendation dated today, which I saw as I was sitting here. I don't know what this document that was being waved around was, and I don't want to pretend I know which one it is. But there's a vital difference between the first one proposed by Peter Schauer on behalf of applicant and what the Conservation Commission approved, and which Brian included in his staff recommendation. I favor Brian's version, which I believe is the Conservation Commission's approved version, and I copied it essentially into my letter to you today. The key point there, though I would argue that a number less than 250 would be appropriate, but the key point that differs from his proposal is that he said in his first proposal, if any of these samples come up above 250, that they'll do something about it. That to me wasn't enough. Brian's proposal and the Conservation Commission's proposal is at 250 or above. If the test results show levels that exceed the maximum contaminant level, the owner applicant is to cease the use of the salt shed and rectify the matter. So that says stop operations. That's a lot better than just do something about it over the next year, 2 years, 10 years. So I would ask that you, if you approve, and I would urge you not to approve the site plan, but if you do, condition it as indicated in the staff report, which includes a shutdown of operations if these samples come up above legal limits. And as I'll note, I know that I've only read minutes. I wasn't here at the last meetings. Peter Schauer and others said, "Oh, 250 isn't that high. You can find 250 milligrams per liter of salt in, I don't know, in lemon juice or in whatever." I don't remember what example he used. And it isn't an enormous number. It tastes a little bit salty. The point, though, is how much more is it than is in our background groundwater, in Goffstown and throughout New Hampshire. The answer there is the background that you would expect, but for a salt shed without a floor, is about 1 to 2 milligrams per liter. So we're talking about 200 times background, not, gee, it's not very salty. I'd like you to keep that in mind. Answer about the BMPs. The engineer for applicant said he didn't know what the BMPs were. He doesn't know if he designed the shed to meet BMPs. He couldn't honestly say that he had, and I commend him for his honesty and not shining you on about that. I have the BMPs from the DES environmental fact sheet that says storage and management of salt de-icing materials, and one of the sections under this several-page fact sheet are proposed best management practices, and there are several. best management practices for locating a new de-icing material storage facility should include the following. So this is at least several of them. And rather than read them to you and ask you to write them into a condition tonight, I would suggest that since he didn't know, since you don't have that as a proposal yet, another reason to continue this until an engineer can tell you if what he cited and designed meets these standards. It's a minimum. Remember, this is an applicant who's done this all illegally up till now and is now asking after the fact to be permitted. I don't think you go overboard to loosen things in that case. I think you require rather rigorous adherence to at least the minimum management practices. And one of them, I will tell you right off the bat, I know it doesn't meet, because a minimum, one of the BMPs here, one of several, is drainage that is contaminated with salt should be directed to a sewage treatment plant subject to municipal approval, collected for use in pre-wetting activities, or sent for proper disposal. In other words, collect it and treat it. There's none of that here. I mean, any water that's coming into any of his perforated pipe drainage or swale or dry well or whatever isn't going to be treated. It's discharging right back into the groundwater or out onto the edge of my client's property. There's no treatment proposed whatsoever, and that's a BMP. I would suggest you'd not approve this site plan on the basis of salt. Site screening. I don't want to take nearly as much time on that, because to me it's much more minor an issue in terms of health and safety, at least, than a slumping detention pond or salt contamination of my client's property. But screening is important, and I will point out that the law in New Hampshire, and I know Jim knows this, is that when you make a representation in an application for a variance that is a significant representation that is a basis for granting the variance, that representation becomes a condition of the variance when it's granted, and that's North Country Environmental Services versus Town of Bethlehem. I won't have to read the site into the reg because you have my letter. And under that requirement, this applicant, in order to get the variance represented to that zoning board, quote, abutters will be adequately screened from any landscaping business activities. So not just materials and equipment, which is the explicit condition, but he represented it will all be screened, all business activities. I suggest that's not happening here. Very specifically, and I won't waste time on it, he hasn't screened the employee parking. Whoops, his plan is down. But the employee parking lot in the corner of the property nearest my client's house is not screened at all. There are no trees shown there. And you actually have a requirement in Appendix F, Section 2, subsection 4C, that requires screening of parking lots from residential homes when the parking lot is within 50 feet of the boundary line, which this is far less on this plan. So there's an explicit landscaping requirement in your site plan regs that he hasn't met.
Can I ask you a physical question?
Yes.
Is there a barn between Mr. Gibson's house and this parking lot?
A barn?
Yes.
Yes.
So you can't physically see the parking
You can
from
from
the house?
You can from his property. You might not be able from his
property,
house.
but not the house. You said house.
Well, the question is, who has the obligation to provide the screening? Is it the applicant or do
I
you?
understand. Okay, I just was, the statement needs to be
Okay.
correct.
Residential
You know-
home becomes an issue.
You know what, I'm willing to back off on my statement because I don't want to be wrong. If, in fact, and was unaware of that barn, it can't be seen from the home. The reg is that well, I knew I saw it a second. It is a requirement to screen from residential homes whenever the parking lot is within 50 feet. So I don't know if it can be seen from any part of his home or not.
Okay.
But I think one ought to look at that and consider requiring some trees, given that he is putting a parking lot, employee parking lot, virtually, on the boundary, not deep into the lot, but near the front, near the house.
Yep.
I would support a requirement that with all these trees and shrubs and understory planned, that you require 75% 3-year survival or something similar, because dead trees are no screen at all. The fueling station needs to have more stringent controls, and I think rather than research them all, you ought to, at least if you approve, put in a condition that it meet, excuse me, all federal, state, and local environmental and fire safety codes. My client is convinced, and I don't know enough about it, didn't have enough time, that he doesn't know what kind of tank it is. There are no specs in any of the plans. Is it double-walled, single-walled? What's the containment going to be? Really, what is this facility? And depending on its construction and all, there are different requirements for siting and protection. And again, it's indicated on the plan as a square. There is no, it's a pad and a square. Well, raised tank, not raised tank, double wall, single wall. What are we doing? And that's an important environmental and safety issue. 3 more points quickly. I know it's very late. Lots of stuff has been installed on this site without any permits. Drainage pipe or drainage ditch that crosses the property, marked as being a proposed 130 linear foot, 18-inch perforated pipe. I don't think that it meets the Appendix C, Section 5S engineering requirements for subsurface drainage. They're really explicit in your regs. Sizing, depth, all kinds of stuff. Lots of engineering involved in how to do subsurface drainage. Again, it shows a pipe. It shows none of those criteria in your regs and how it meets them. And I don't see a supplementary page or plan on that. I may have missed it, but I believe that you need to either require that be done or that it be taken out and something installed that does meet current site plan regs. Just because it's in there already should not give him an advantage, but he should start at ground zero. And finally, I have a number of conditions that I want to list to you that, again, I'd rather you disapprove this as premature and not meeting the standards and not meeting the burden of proving that they've met the standards. But if not, here's what I would ask. As I said a little earlier, when an applicant says, here's what I'm going to do, that's why I don't diminish abutting property values, therefore, you can give me the variance, and absolutely represents it, then that representation becomes a condition of the approval. And here's what he said in his application, not verbally, written in his variance application, page 2. Workdays are limited to weekdays only, and employees will come and go from the property only at the beginning and end of each workday. Only 4 to 5 employees will park their cars on the property during that time. Therefore, any business-related traffic or noise will be minimal and be restricted to normal working hours. So I suggest those become conditions of the variance because he made them so by representing that would be the basis on which they could grant the variance. Therefore, and I won't read them to you because you've got it in writing, but I'd like you to limit, if you grant at all, the landscaping business to weekdays only. That's what he said. And to normal working hours. So that's so that my client at least isn't bothered at 11 p.m. with landscaping business stuff going on. And you might set the hours and define what normal working hours are. You certainly have the right to set hours of operation under your site plan regs. You should set the maximum number of employees. You should also indicate the 2 things that are indicated by Derek in his letter of June 7th that I have attached just for your convenience. That there shall be no wholesale or retail sales of materials from the site. That requires a different approval from the zoning board he doesn't have. There shall be no processing of materials on site. I note that they've added that newly as a note, so they do not disagree with that, but it's an important limitation. You ought to repeat the variance requirements, and I've repeated them just so they're all on one document. You can only grant a site plan approval consistent with the variance. So repeating their requirement of the impervious floor in the salt shed and 25-foot setbacks, I think, would be wise. And I request 2 other conditions, and I'll shut up, and I'll be as happy as you about doing that. And that is, I would suggest that you not allow or limit on your plan approval, if you approve, that any washing of equipment or vehicles be done on an impervious surface with the wash water captured for degreasing and appropriate treatment before discharge. I mean, you have all this equipment running around, you're fueling it, you're doing all kinds of work. You put it out there on the yard in front of the barn and wash it all down, you're washing oil, grease, gas, brake fluid, all the rest of it, fertilizers, everything you're using in your landscaping business that you're spilling on the spreaders or whatever, right onto the soil and right into the groundwater and right onto my client's property. So if you're going to do all that, it ought to be done in a contained area and that stuff captured and degreased. And finally, I'd suggest that because this applicant has operated for years without site plan approval or building permits, has ceased doing a few things according to a stop work order and emptied the salt shed, you nonetheless require not that he keep operating as going and slowly put in and do these various things that you may require as conditions subsequent, but that he stop operating illegally until and unless all the work required by a site plan approval is completed and inspected and checked off, and when he is legal, he resume. That's not cruel or unusual. That's what the law would require, that he not operate until he is approved. And again, I don't suggest that you bend over backwards to allow him to operate because you don't want to stop him when his operation is currently illegal. He does not have site plan approval to be running a landscaping business in this agricultural zone. He does not have it today. He should not be operating until he has site plan approval. I apologize for how long it took me. I didn't time myself, but I've sat here a long time and a lot needed to be said. I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you. Members of the board, do we have any questions of the Mr. Callen?
Thank you.
Seeing none at the moment. Any observations or questions from members of the board? I would give the applicant an opportunity to address any issues briefly. Please.
Yes. Again, my name is Kevin Bob. If I could just briefly rebut some of the statements made by Attorney Callen. One, on the engineering calculations, there is a separate document that was provided. I'm looking over Megan's shoulder before and seeing it. So that document exists and it's certainly available. I don't know the date on that, but it has been older versions have certainly been in the record, and this is available to everyone now. The salt monitoring, there's no question what has been proposed by the Conservation Commission and what we proposed as our current plan. The intent is that those are the same. So certainly we're in agreement that what Brian has included in his recommendations is what we would live with and what we're proposing as the current. Regarding screening, just like to clarify that what was written in the zoning application was that there was adequate screening. And there is adequate screening. It's the existing vegetation between the two properties. If some of that vegetation is going to be removed to move the driveway for safety reasons, it certainly wouldn't have a problem with adding some more landscaping. But we want to clarify, you've all been out there, or most of you have been out there for the sidewalk. There is significant vegetation between the two properties that acts as screening. The 18-inch drainage pipe, I'm not really clear on that. that is marked as proposed on the plan, and it is proposed. It has not been installed at this point. And then regarding the limitations on hours and on washing vehicles, just ask that, you remember that this is a working business, and that ask that Mr. Fournier's landscaping business and residential use is treated as anyone else would be in the agricultural zone. Limitations on hours. The major concern is that those would be normal working hours for a landscaping business, and that includes snow removal. That doesn't mean that there will be people operating on site, but there will be vehicles coming and going for snow emergencies. That's just a fact of life, and we just ask that this site plan and this business is treated as any other landscaping business in the town of Goffstown in the agricultural zone.
Thank you. Members of the board have any final questions for the applicant or any of the presenters this evening? I am not going to close the public hearing as of yet until we have some discussion as to whether there wants to be any further considerations or the board wishes to wait for submission or presentation of any additional information.
So I just have a question for Megan. Were drainage calculations done?
Yes, this is the version I got yesterday. There have been several of these that, I don't know how many are available through planning board, but, we're talking down to nitty-gritty numbers, I don't even know, how much, I guess if you saw one book versus the other, where you'd even be able to find the changes. I know where they are, I'm just saying, obviously this is all open to the public, and they can review this, but, you gotta know exactly what you're looking for and what numbers, and we were down to some changes where it was really, the reason we made this last change is because, it was more I wanna say misinterpretation of the rules. He interpreted it one way, I interpreted it one way, talked to Carl, kinda got his version of it, and went back to him, and we made some minor changes on it. But the overall concept is still the same. The pond sizing didn't change at all. It was, all that happened was a bleeder pipe was added to slowly release water instead of forcing, to hold all of the water and then overflow it. Because when we were doing that, too much water was getting out. And so by adding the bleeder pipe and allowing, a small amount of water to get out during any storm, it decreased the amount during the 50-year storm and actually made the situation better. And as he said, the 50-year post-storm is less than the 25-year pre. So it improved and created less flows. And all those numbers are in here. But there have been other versions, several other versions of this. So I don't know, if anybody's reviewed any other versions, but this was the latest, and I did get it yesterday, and just checked those last couple numbers on a few of the sheets. You you got a big booklet, I probably checked 5 or, 10 of the sheets, because you check 5 sheets for one storm, 5 sheets for the other. So it's all one book that you get, but there's only a few numbers that really needed to be checked in this last iteration.
Would you have considered the change in this last version to be substantive?
No, I mean, the only reason, last week when I had reviewed this, and I apologize to the applicant's engineer, because they submitted this information to me over a month ago, about a month ago I got it, and I've just been out straight and busy and hadn't had a chance to get to it, and I got to it last minute. I had thought this last submittal I had gotten a month ago was gonna be all set, there wouldn't be any problem, so when I got to it and found, well, I interpreted it differently than them, that required this last new submission. So that should have been done a month ago, I just hadn't gotten to it, so that is partly my fault. I really don't consider it material, but because drainage is such a sensitive subject, last week when I was providing my comments, I told Brian that because there was still an outstanding drainage issue, it wasn't 100% resolved, I felt as though, he should have the compliance hearing. If the staff
Because I noticed that there's a compliance hearing in October 14th scheduled. Okay, that's why.
was because of this last issue, but it's resolved. Because I
Okay.
felt as though when you got your mailing, it wasn't 100% resolved, and
All right, so that's why the October 14th hearing is there.
And Mr. Chair and members of the board, if I can comment on this as well, if it's a concern that there was not adequate notice to the public for whatever reason on this issue, the compliance hearing can remain as a condition of approval, allowing public enough time to take a look and see for themselves whether or not the drainage issue has been done, and then the compliance hearing would just reiterate, that fact. So, I mean, if that's an issue, then that compliance
but
hearing could stay in the conditions.
The last draft, so to speak, before this bleeder pipe was a month ago.
Correct.
Okay.
Other members of the board? If we have a compliance hearing and there might be other issues, do we want to leave the public hearing open? We can't, we can't adjudicate on this without closing the public hearing, can we? No. What would be the vehicle to take additional information beyond this point if we take action this evening?
There is none.
There is none, right?
Yes. In my view, if you approve with a condition subsequent that has to be met,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a hearing to determine that it's been done, or you set up a condition that has to be met for it to become final, but you've limited the outstanding issues to that, whatever you have in the compliance hearing. Typically, you have those when either the further information requires some more than administrative approval. That's something that the public is entitled to comment on. But it's limited to that. So if you want to otherwise act, we would close the public hearing and identify that as a matter to be heard to ensure compliance. Those are your choices.
Okay. Members of the board, how do you feel? Go around the room. Corey?
I'm not Corey.
You just can't get over that, can you?
Carl,
we'll bring a
I
sign.
got it written right in front of me. It's right
We'll
here.
bring a sign next time, and every time he looks over here, I'll hold it up, all right?
I did propose name tags at one point in time.
Stop that.
Well, he's just doing a hybrid. A Carl Foley becomes Corey.
I still think that could be a useful item here.
Especially with certain chairs.
Yes, so the chair can't remember people's names. That's correct. Carl?
I would be inclined to continue this, seeing that we just did receive some of this information, this plan this evening.
Tim?
It should be continued.
Collis?
Yeah, I think we need additional information. I'm reluctant to continue it because we've got an operation that's ongoing. It's illegal, and it's causing disruption of abutting property owners. So I don't want to drag this out any more than we have to, but my biggest concern right now is the slope stability and the soils on this property. We got soils that were placed there. We don't know what kind of soils they were. They don't know how they were compacted or if they were compacted. We don't know what their load-bearing capacity is, and yet we're proposing development on top of them. I want to see a technical report by a soils engineer saying that the fill is suitable and it's structural fill and it can support these things. He may come back and say, you know what, it's structurally not sound and it needs to come out and be replaced with structural fill. If that's the case, we've got a major issue here to deal with. So that's my biggest concern at this point. To have the representation, well, it's been there for a few years, it's probably compacted itself. Doesn't cut it with me. And that's a significant technical issue that's going to take some time to be resolved if that's what the board's inclined to do.
Barbara?
Well, I say this as the person who could not do the site walk because my left foot was disabled, so I comment now with my right foot disabled. So I understand, and I've missed one meeting, I believe, on this. But there have been a number of meetings about this, so asking for a soils sample now, I don't quite understand where that's coming, because I don't know that there's been any substantive change in the issue of the slope and the fact that there were going to be some sort of treatment of the runoff along that slope. And quite frankly, I don't think it's fair to the applicant to be raising that now. I am reluctant to continue this because the applicant has made a heck of a presentation with his staff here in regards to the issues that are presented. I also have to say that Attorney Callan's presentation focused on the issues, and if I can just say why I am not inclined to continue it, I think Attorney Callan's are the substantive comments are the substantive ones that need to be addressed. In regards to the detention pond, there is the soil issue that was raised, which I've just made my comment on. I don't believe, after listening to the comments tonight, that these plans have been submitted late. I understand that there was a change yesterday, but it's my understanding this plan has been available for over a month, and I haven't heard from anybody that there was a request made for the plan previously. The comment is just that it just came in, and therefore it shouldn't be approved, and that the change was not substantive. There was a question about the calculations, whether they were done. They were done. So from what I heard, this information has been available and sounds like it's adequate, absent this new issue in regards to some sort of test pits or soils. In regards to the salt discharge issue, again, I think a valid issue raised. I will note that on page 3 of Attorney Callan's letter, the 3 bullets in regards to the monitoring points have all been incorporated into the comments from Conservation and the document prepared by the applicant, which has been presented to us. I would also note that the 3-year testing requirement was incorporated into the document from the Conservation Commission, and that submitted by the applicant to us. I will also note that the standard of 250 milligrams per liter is suggested by Attorney Callan is in fact what is in what was submitted by Conservation and the applicant. The difference in the salt comment appears to be what I would almost refer to as sort of an evidence-checking issue of requiring various samples, chains of custodies, and all sorts of people getting to do their own test. We've already been through that with this application. I don't think that gets us anywhere. It sounds like there was an agreement with Conservation and the applicant on testing. It sounded adequate to me. In regards to the site screening, I think the substantive issues were the 75% for 3 years, and there was an issue as to whether or not there was an issue for employee parking appeared to be the valid issue raised. I would hope that the board could raise the issue of screening for parking. And as to the fueling station, I certainly think the comment by Attorney Callan that it meet federal, state, and fire safety codes is appropriate. It was my understanding from Don Duval's presentation that I think there are ballards that were required by the fire station and that there had been an agreement to do that. I'm confused about the 18-inch pipe. I didn't view that I viewed that as something we could discuss. And I think we need to have a discussion and an exact thing of the variance in regards to the operation, because I think normal working hours for an agricultural zone in regards to a landscaping business are subject to much discussion, and I recall this board placed very few limits on an application for a landscaping business that was in a commercial district right next to some residents in Pinardville. So I appreciate that there are a number of issues here, and I don't even know if we began discussion that we finished tonight, given that I know at least one other person would think that 11 o'clock would be the zombie hour, but you know, I think those are the issues that I've seen as raised by the abutter through council. I think they're valid issues, and it appeared to me that the majority of them had been addressed generally and in some cases specifically. So to me, after hearing 1, 2, 3, the big issue, as far as I can see, is an issue being raised by a board member who's been present for all of these applications, for all of these discussions, in regards to whether we're going to require some sort of soil testing, and I don't know what that would be.
All due respect, Barbara, we didn't know the specific arrangement or configuration of the detention basins where they were gonna go until tonight. And tonight there were
Okay.
representations made that, I don't know what the soils were, I think they're compacted okay. There are representations made to treatment. I think it's getting treated, I'm not sure how it's getting treated, I think it's a combination of stuff, I'm not really sure what it is. So, to me, there was testimony presented tonight, that was new testimony that
Okay.
is pretty weak,
I,
in my opinion, so we can disagree on that.
I just thought the treatment had always been proposed on that side.
Let's stop the disagreements and move over this side of
Oh,
the table here. Phil, you got any observations on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Barbara did a pretty good wrap-up on pretty much the issues. I personally don't have a problem going forward with it, but I looking at the hour and knowing about the 11 o'clock posed curfew would probably be an issue anyway.
It's in our rules.
Exactly. But we could always waive the rules too. But I think one thing that that I'd like to point out is on Brian Rose's submittal to us, his key considerations is the plans were submitted 3 weeks prior to the meeting, giving staff ample time for review. I mean, we did get these. I did have time to go through here. There are, I thought that the landscaping plan was quite impressive, the size of the trees, considering some of the prior applications that we've done with some screening, such as, I won't mention the site, but on the back road that we all know about. And if something like this was presented by that, we may not have had the issues. I think,
He's looking at you.
I'm just looking at that side of the table because you're in front of me. The other side of the table.
I know what you're referring to.
All right.
Exactly.
We won't point at the guilty people.
No, I'm not trying to point anybody out.
No, I know.
Motion to adjourn.
I don't think I'm getting dinner tonight.
Let's move right over here to Steve.
Yeah, I would not be inclined to continue it except for, given the time and the number of issues involved, I think that sort of sways me to thinking that perhaps we should continue this to when we have more time to adequately consider all the moving parts here.
Jim?
I share Collis's concern in response to Barbara's question. There was testimony on the bank at I think it was the last hearing.
July meeting.
Yeah, and the applicant really being warned that was an issue, I think had an obligation to come prepared to respond to it, and I think the response tonight was more conclusory than backed up, so it was presented to them, and I don't think it was dealt with, so I share Collis's concern. And even if we weren't going for it, I'd want to continue this, because I need time to formulate a motion if we're going to approve, because the recommendations from Mr. Rose don't address many of the points that we've discussed. So it's going to take a more detailed form of conditions than we have in front of us. That just takes some time to develop. Whether you need a public hearing to do that, or you just close the public hearing. But for this slope issue, I think you could decide, but that has to remain open. I want to hear more on that.
If you don't close the public hearing, you allow the applicant and the presenters to be sure they review any documentation beforehand so that there's no miscarriage of information. And secondly, if there's going to be a concern with the soils on that banking, we would want to request that somebody provide us some information. I know there were test pits dug on that banking, and based upon some earlier testimony, but I don't know whether anybody analyzed it, the soil materials. I don't remember reading anything about that. So I would undertake a motion to continue.
And make that motion.
To our next meeting?
Well, I'm not sure that's enough time to have the information. Collis, you're a better judge of the time required to develop that information, submit it to the board in time for others to review it for the banking stability. because we
I
have a
would think the
2 weeks.
onus is on the, excuse me, I would think the onus would be on the applicant to be timely.
Well, correct, but if it's gonna be heard 2 weeks from now, it's gotta be in time for others to review it, which means it has to be done the next week.
Yes.
Yeah, and I imagine would require somebody to go out and do some borings and look at the fill
I
material.
just don't know that that's
Assess it.
feasible.
Yes, Phil.
Why don't we ask the applicant's engineer how much time he would need to do that? I assume he's the one doing it.
You know, I'm not trying to be an obstructionist here, you know, I want to bring this to conclusion so we can, but, you know, we can talk about aesthetics, we can talk about noise, but this is a life safety issue. If we get failure of that slope, this is a life safety issue, this is important. This, in my mind, is the most important issue that needs to be addressed. All the rest of the stuff we can deal with. Noise, hour of operations, screening, landscaping, we're gonna deal with all of that through conditions of a permit.
Attorney Baum, how soon could you get a representation of the questions just posed here at the board?
Well, I couldn't fully hear, but just to clarify, I think I heard Mr. Adams talking about geotechnical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think we would certainly need more than 2 weeks to get geotechnical work done. Do you have a sense, Don?
So I would look at somebody like Miller Testing, I think they do actions, I mean, Megan's, or bouncing her head yes to, would you agree with that? Somebody like Miller Testing?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
kinda curious what costs they get, you know, are we talking
yeah. Geotech work.
GSI, Miller, that type of thing?
Yeah, those kind of people, yeah.
I mean, are we looking at compaction tests or that too?
I
or
would
just
assume they'd come in and do some borings and look at the fill and render a professional opinion as to whether or not it's structurally suitable. You know, we don't know if there's organics in there, if there's wood debris that was put in there. We have no clue what was put in there. And again, it's a life safety issue, so I think that rises to a whole different level.
I mean, I don't wanna get into it too much now, like I said, I won't get into it now, but Peter Schauer they pretty much test
No.
this, and again, so I don't wanna get into the whole thing of what's in there.
I'll just respond to that. He dug test pits to determine whether or not fill was placed on wetlands. He did nothing to analyze the soils.
Oh, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I said, we just addressed the issue of whether they.
Gentlemen.
In addition,
Gentlemen,
that Peter's not qualified.
Chair will make a decision.
October 14th, 2 weeks.
1 month.
October
I'd make that
14th.
motion.
October 14th?
14th is on our list.
I think a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second? Seconded by Phil. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Oop,
I'm sorry.
You
Could
can
I-
speak.
Could I just ask a quick question prior to us acting on the continuance or motion? And that would be for the applicant to address each of the conditions proposed by Baldwin and Callan, so that these issues may be, if they're acceptable to the applicant, included into the report for further, for the next time, so that way it's not gonna be lacking as much information if there's an issue
I mean,
with
in all fairness, I
lacking
think that's up to the
information.
applicant, and quite honestly, half of them are already considered, so
I understand that, and I'm just,
we have the material to review.
Duly noted, and it'll be in the minutes. And we had, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
On October 14th?
Motion carries unanimously, October 14th. Continuing. Public hearing is still open. All right.
I'm just gonna note for our planner, please, Mr. Rose, that I'm looking at the other item on this. So we've got it on October 14th, so we have a couple of discussion matters, right?
Yep.
And hopefully the rest of it, the agenda that night won't be too much. Discourage
Okay.
other people.
just continued two things.
That night, were they both to that night?
Yeah, Blackbriar went to that.
I want to ask, I want to ask, I want to ask a technical question. We still have one
So he never did a
case to adjudicate, and that is the phasing. We didn't vote on that.
Yeah, we did.
We did?
Yeah, I just have one question though for the board.
It's from a
previous meeting. How is the association and the control of the open space gonna be handled if only phase one gets built. Test pit one, test pit three.
He never even reached the
Right,
original.
but then these were we want the test pits here.
Technically speaking, if the plan is recorded, the open space exists from day one.
I didn't mean to mark that up.
And that,
Exactly, that's my point.
You should see the pile that got downstairs on the ping pong table.
I can't imagine. I understand. The open space for the entire project,
yes.
okay? And what
Exist.
happens in phase two and phase three don't get built?
Are we still discussing?
No, I'm just asking.
He's asking a question. I have no clue.
Can we adjourn before we ask questions?
You can do anything you want. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Oh,
I thought he said any other business.
Alan, this gentleman here in the audience, is he here for something special?
I have no clue.
When are you meeting next? This has to do with the Walton site case.
Did he come in after we continued this?
Been sitting here all night.
Oh, no. We had continued that meeting.
They were talking about it tonight.
What time did you get here?
Well, you missed
7:15.
He had already done it.
No, we didn't. Not at
He had made
7:15.
the notification that we were gonna.
We probably weren't clear. The Waltons, the application was never considered. The application was not accepted. We made a motion to not accept it.
Oh, heavens, so I missed that?
Yes. So,
Well,
thank you for putting up with us for the last 3 hours.
oh, wait, just so that you understand, they never had an application here for any discussion because we didn't accept it.
So nothing will be happening.
Because they were there was a
Premature.
change after.
So it was never submitted?
Well,
There was an application, however, it wasn't up to standard for being able to accept it.
That's the first thing you do, is determine whether it's acceptable or not. And it didn't meet the standards.
And that was the reason for the hearing
Okay,
tonight.
so I'll go home and go to bed. Everybody gets the fourth one.
Well, you're welcome to come to our next meeting. They're all,
Well, will it come up again?
If it does, you will be grandfathered.
You'll be re-notified.
I don't know, how long have they been there?
Poor guy.
I don't know.
Yes, Brian.
Do you want to bring up the ZBA topic of discussion from two nights ago?
Not really. We went down the flames at the ZBA. And although we all got notices,
The appeal,
on the, yeah, that's what my question.
On the car storage?
Car storage, salvage, broker.
I got notified
thing we talked about last,
Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock on my cell phone, and the hearing was Tuesday night. And so I busted around, Brian and I busted around and showed up here Tuesday night to the zoning board. But to my knowledge, no one ever received a notice.
well, the notice, the only notice that was provided, at least to this appeal, was to myself, which I had thought that the notice had been subsequently also mailed to the planning board and the chair, and it was not. So that might be an issue to bring up.
so they appealed our,
We appealed the zoning administrator's decision about a
Yes.
Right.
junkyard.
Auto salvage dealer.
And whether it was permissible.
And,
No.
At all.
and
Whether he could establish a class in what it most closely resembled.
and we didn't,
And it did not get up, Derek's decision basically was upheld, that it was allowed under the sales of automobiles and boats and.
And the reason was that manufactured homes is prohibited in the zoning ordinance and also in the table of uses. It has manufactured homes.
Because it wasn't specifically
It wasn't
prohibited
specific,
as a
it wasn't
junkyard in the-
specifically prohibited in the table of uses. And we had that discussion.
That's a backwards interpretation of the ordinance.
that's a completely backwards interpretation, and we should have gotten a notice of that.
I've got to appeal that notice now.
I don't have a problem with that.
You apply, you have
Well-
to apply, the official way to do that is you make an application for a rehearing.
However, I was told by Derek that the planning board cannot do a rehearing with the ZBA, it has to come from the Board of Selectmen,
Yeah, I'm not sure where.
based on some previous law
Yeah,
case.
we're not a separate.
The only other option, and we sort of discussed this afterwards, was to just, in our upcoming meeting, we're gonna be discussing proposed changes to the zoning ordinance. Let that go aside and let their decision be whatever it is, and change the zoning ordinance to specifically prohibit whatever you wanna prohibit.
But that's
Wait,
sort of
co-
not
co-
the issue. The
court-
issue is a disagreement over
There-
the interpretation and the
Yeah.
process we should have been notified
Yeah,
of.
because court cases have been decided on people not being notified.
Well, the question is, are we entitled to file? We're not a separate, we're a board of the town, but it doesn't give us separate rights as the town. So I don't know the answer to that, but it is an issue. I'm not sure we have appeal rights. I didn't say anything on that because I figured it slipped it by. But they are flat-ass wrong in their interpretation of the ordinance. It's written based upon a
We still on
permissive ordinance. It means
Yeah, I know,
you do
yeah.
what is
We're not
permitted in
adjourned.
your
Jim
ordinance.
just said
That's the
flat
basis
ass
of it.
wrong, didn't he?
Ask this in the dictionary. It's a
Well,
valid
but the basis is that Derek has the opportunity to decide whether or not something fits within a category that is in the zoning ordinance.
That's correct, but it's
And-
not that, if it's not prohibited, it's allowed. Is it sufficiently close to a permitted use to be permitted? That's his job, but that's not what I heard them saying. They're saying because it wasn't prohibited,
It's allowed.
That was one of the statements from the board,
and that's wrong.
but the other one was,
Well, it can be
doesn't
allowed,
say you
and
can't
he
do it,
made
then
that
you can't
decision
do it.
that it can be
you
allowed,
can
and
do
they
it.
were upholding that.
Right, but that's not how we read it.
well, we have another option. Fire the zoning administrator. Get a new one. Yes, we are. It can be in the record.
Is the designation permitted?
Can I say something from the meeting?
She's a member of the ZBA,
One of the things
voted in favor.
I voted for the planning board. One of the things that we did emphasize was that even though this is Derek's decision, the zoning board by itself is not held to his decision. We can still vote freely from that.
What?
That is true.
Well, I mean, that may be true, but when you've had an appeal and you've made a determination now, you're gonna be pretty hard pressed to make a different determination. We've essentially raised the appeal issue in regards to interpretation, and you've already taken a position on it.
Don't yell at Gail.
I'm not
I
yelling
was-
at Gail,
I
I'm like,
I was on your side.
It was a
No, I
great,
know.
it was a great 2-hour session in front of the ZBA, I'm telling you. And we were last. What time we get out? 11:30?
45.
10:45.
It's 10:55 now.
It's 3 to 2.
We beat him.
Jim?
We make a motion to adjourn?
Yes, you may.
Did and Carla seconded.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Before you
Aye.
vote on that, just let me make one statement, that our town attorney claims that his, part of the reason for his success, high success in defending our cases is because of the hard work and the good hard work that the staff provides him for the backup on the cases.
I don't doubt that.
That would be a certified copy of the record, please.
No, it's a little bit more than that, Margot. And I'll still drop you off if you need a ride.
I don't need it. That's the only reason I said it.
I know.
Oh, I think we voted with our feet.
What's that?
Aye.
Aye,
We're adjourned.
we're adjourned.
Call for the vote?